Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar. If you have just joined us, stay tuned as this webinar is scheduled to begin at 9:40 this morning. We are waiting for more participants to join us. If you are having trouble hearing us, use the raise hand icon or type a help message in the question and answer pod at the bottom of the screen. In the meantime, while waiting for more participants, please enjoy the videos that we are about to play for you. Thank you.
Havelsan works for technologic excellence and security. For the security armies, countries, our world, our future. Havelsan designs defense, information technology, energy, education, military and civilian. We design innovative technologies for more secure, more efficient lives. We produce local, national, regional, global, tailor-made for every demand. We produce unique technologies for stronger, faster, superior systems. We design and produce for success in all areas in which we exist. Havelsan brings situational awareness with our exploration, surveillance and intelligence systems. Brings operational efficiency and assessment ability with our command and control systems. Brings striking power with our naval warfare systems. Reliable, effective protection with our cybersecurity systems. Trained manpower with our simulation systems. Peace and continuity with our homeland security systems. Corporate transformation and speed with our e-government applications. Effectiveness with our health IT applications. Sustainability with our logistics support. Value with our system engineering. Efficiency with our energy management systems. We, Havelsan, as a subsidiary of the Turkish Armed Forces Foundation, work for our clients in design, software, production, and integration capabilities. We work with our trust, our advanced technology, human resources, the importance we attach to industrial cooperation, smarter systems, and affordable solutions. Power, trust, superiority, efficiency, quality, originality, effectiveness, sustainability. We are getting prepared for tomorrow's technologies to meet the needs of our customers at the highest standards.
Yang berbahagia, Tan Sri, Datuk-Datuk, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. On behalf of the National Resilience College, together with the Smart Partnership of Defence Services Asia, or DSA, we welcome all participants to the Statesman's web seminar or webinar entitled Thinking the Unthinkable, Decisive Action in the South China Sea. The aim of this webinar is to discuss and analyze the question of should claimant states take a more assertive stance to protect their claims. The interaction and views of invited panelists in this webinar will enable course members and participants to understand Malaysia's position in this area. The three invited panelists from today's event are, the first is Yang Berbahagia Mr. Harizal Hazri, who is the Chief Executive of the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, or ISIS, Malaysia. Second is the esteemed Emeritus Professor Dr. Carlisle Thayer from the School of Humanities and Social Science, University of New South Wales, Australia. And third, Yang Berbahagia Dr. Adina Kamrudin, who is the Director General of the Department of Maritime Affairs from the Malaysian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And moderating the session will be Professor Dr. Adam Leong, who is the Deputy Director of Research, Center for Defense and International Security Studies from the National Defense University of Malaysia. In general, the program this morning will begin shortly with the opening remarks by the Commandant of the National Resilience College, followed by the keynote address by the Malaysian Chief of Defence Forces to officiate this event. The webinar will then commence with each of the panel members presenting their views for 20 minutes and followed by a 1-hour question and answer session. Today's event is expected to end by 1 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin our event this morning, with great pleasure, we invite the Commandant of the National Resilience College, Major General Datuk Muhammad Nizam bin Haji Jaafar, to deliver his opening remarks.
Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri, Datuk-Datuk, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to all the attendees and participants of the webinar entitled Thinking the Unthinkable, Decisive Action in the South China Sea. I am very happy and honored with the overwhelming response from the participants who have registered for the webinar. This webinar, known as the Statesman's Webinar, is organized and co-hosted by the National Resilience College, Puspahanas, the National Defense University of Malaysia, and Defense Service Asia. Our aim is to tap the curiosity in us by questioning and analyzing the central topic of our discussion this morning, which is the South China Sea issue and whether claimant state should be more assertive in their stance pertaining to their claims. So many questions of what if and the probable scenarios relating to this region, and hoping this webinar will be able to provide some answers of the many questions. Ladies and gentlemen, the sole purpose of this college as a premier strategic learning institution is challenging the norm in our way of thinking as a means of intellectual and academic discourse. We hope to develop course members who are strategic thinkers of statesman's quality and as part of our individual's professional development. For the other participants and attendees of the webinar, this webinar should be seen and taken as platform, as well as professional thinking approach to current issues affecting our national security and aspirations. We should be current with situation and have our own perception and develop our own analysis of the situation. We are thankful for the contribution and support from our Chief of Defence Force, General Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dat Effendi Buang, who have agreed to give the keynote address to this webinar. Our thanks also for the participation of our esteemed panelists, Mr. Harizal Hazri, the Chief Executive of Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ISIS Malaysia, Learning and South China Sea expert, Emeritus Professor Kalal Etea from the University of New South Wales, Australia, and also Dr. Adina Kamarudin from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would also like to welcome our esteemed moderator, our very own Associate Professor, Dr. Adam Leong Kok Wee from the National Defence University of Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, as a closing remark, I would urge participants of this webinar to take the ideas proposed by our panelists and the discussion that are founded today as a rewarding experience in an academic setting. Looking forward to the intellectual discourse during this webinar, and may we all be blessed and learn from the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Major General Datuk Muhammad Nizam, for your opening remarks. To officiate the webinar this morning, with great honor, we present to you the Malaysian Chief of Defence Forces, Yang Berbahagia General Tan Sri Haji Effendi bin Buang, RMAF, in delivering his keynote address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berbahagia Vice Admiral Datuk Syed Zahrul Putra bin Syed Abdullah, President of the National Centre for Defence Studies. Yang berbahagia Major General Datuk Muhammad Nizam bin Haji Jaafar, Commandant of the National Resilient College. The distinguished Associate Professor Dr. Adam Leong from the National Defence University of Malaysia and moderator of this webinar. The distinguished Emeritus Professor Dr. Carlis A. Tayer from University of New South Wales. Yang berbahagia Encik Harizal Hazri, Chief Executive of the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia. Yang berbahagia Dr. Adelina Kamarudin, Director General of the Department of Maritime Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning. It is with the grace of Almighty Allah that we are able to gather digitally today in this webinar to deliberate on a highly relevant and highly hotly debated topics. Thinking the unthinkable, decisive action in the South China Sea. For that, I wish to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the National Resilient College for allowing me to present the keynote address of this highly anticipated topic. My deepest admiration and sincere thanks are directed to our distinguished moderator and highly esteemed body of panelists, all of whom are authorities and experts on this subject. I wish to also register my warmest welcome to all participants of this webinar. The South China Sea has been the bone of contention amongst multiple stakeholders, including state and non-state actors from within and beyond the region. The actual momentum of conflicting claims could be traced back to the Third United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS 3, in 1982, which currently has been ratified by 168 parties. This resulted in countries registering their maritime boundaries and exclusive economic zone, many of which still overlap each other. Malaysia territorial waters and EEZ were formalized through the EEZ Act 1984 in adherence to UNCLOS 3. That said, tension related to overlapping claims in South China Seas predate UNCLOS 3. In 1974, Chinese forces occupied the Paracel Island. This was followed by violent clashes between Chinese and Vietnamese forces at the Johnson Reef in 1988, where 3 Vietnamese vessels were sunk and 74 sailors killed. Since then, incidents in the South China Sea have increased in regularity, although no loss of life has been recorded. Nevertheless, claimants continued to occupy and militarize numerous islands in the area. Considering the volatility of the situation in South China Sea, a number of talks has been conducted to avert conflicts. Significantly, the ASEAN-China Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea in 2002, paving way for the formulation of the Code of Conduct for the South China Sea. To date, the COC is still being negotiated while posturing and illegal occupation of territories continue to occur with increased regularity in the South China Sea. In light of this, many would agree that more decisive action need to be taken, possibly to include the use of military force to seek an early resolution. The South China Sea is indeed a vital area in the global geostrategic landscape. In terms of natural resources, the South China Sea is estimated to hold 11 billion barrels of oil, around 190 trillion feet of natural gas, 40% of global liquefied natural gas, and 12% of the world fisheries caught by 50% of all the fishing vessels globally. When it comes to trade, more than 30% of the world shipping trade flows through these waterways. That is around between $3 to $5 trillion worth of trade. This region services a market of 2.2 billion people, made up of China 1.5 billion and around 650 million people in the ASEAN region. That itself is 1/4 of global humanity in just a single region. Over and above that, the South China Sea connects to another key sea line of communication, being the Strait of Malacca, and afford the maritime lifeline for three major economies in the region, namely China, Japan, and South Korea. Hence, any disruption along this key sea line of communication will severely impact international trade and global economy. As such, it is natural that development in South China Sea and East Asia region would invite the attention and intervention of extra-regional players, especially the United States. Peace and stability in the South China Sea are paramount to Southeast Asian nations existence, despite the fact that only 5 member states are claimants. Hence, it has been agreed upon that ASEAN would afford the appropriate multinational forum to engage other key players in the South China Sea issue. ASEAN, through its declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea, urged all parties to exercise restraint to help create a positive environment to resolve disputes and to solve all problems by peaceful means without resort to force. Thus far, Malaysia has been consistent in urging parties to the disputes to avoid the use of force, intimidation, or coercion, and to exercise restraint. As the foreign policy framework says, Malaysia seeks non-militarization of the South China Sea and for it to be an area of peace, friendship, and trade. Dispute in the area should be settled through peaceful means, using a rule-based approach and universally recognized principle of international law such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. On the military front, the Defence White Paper published in 2019 identified Malaysia as a maritime nation with continental route. As such, peace and stability along the waterways around the country remain a key priority in the Malaysia Armed Forces strategic objective. Despite confronted with multiple non-traditional security challenges, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and trans-border crime, the Malaysian Armed Forces continues to develop its capacity to conduct holistic and effective intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance operation within the nation territories to ensure that the country sovereignty is protected. This is performed by adoption of the whole of nation and whole of society approaches. Further to that, the Malaysian Armed Forces has mobilized defense diplomacy within and beyond ASEAN military forces to enhance confidence building and ensure conflict aversion, especially in the face of the South China Sea issue. Being the hotspot that it is, the South China Sea has attracted the presence of a host of non-regional military forces conducting freedom of navigation operation coming as far off from Germany, France and the Netherlands. Apart from the continuous presence of the US Navy carrier group in the region, the South China Sea will be the destination of the Royal Navy Carrier Strike Group 21 later this year. Despite exercising their legal right to conduct FONOPs under UNCLOS, the presence of such diverse and numerous military vessels in the South China Sea would increase the possibility of unintended encounters, which may escalate unnecessarily into conflict situation if unmitigated. Similarly, the airspace above the South China Sea has also seen numerous encounters between military aircraft which would threaten the stability and peace of the region should any misunderstanding occur. Recent history shows two incidents of such scale. Firstly, the Sino-Vietnamese encounter at the Johnson Reef in 1988, and secondly, the 90 minutes gun battle between vessels from the People's Liberation Army Navy and Philippine Navy at Mischief Reef in 1995. Other than that, most military encounter has been more posturing and peaceful. That said, the possibility of unintended encounters is real and the probability of escalation is high. The ASEAN decision to expedite the declaration on the conduct of parties in South China Sea in 2002 has been an effort to mitigate such situation. This led to the agreement to formalize the Code of Conduct, which unfortunately after 19 years remained elusive. Would decisive action, whether politically, diplomatically or military, help expedite an early resolution to this problem? I personally feel otherwise. For decisive action to see the light of the day, it would require some degree of cohesion. Any form of cohesion would beget even more violent cohesion and thus unraveling the effort undertaken thus far to ensure peace and stability within this region. Needless to mention that conflict in South China Sea would escalate rapidly into a general or global engagement granted the importance of the region. Damage caused in the event of a military conflict would impact heavily not just on the rich resources of the area, but would also affect significantly global economy and fester a feeling of distrust which would take generations to reconcile. In a larger sense, it would draw the United States and China into Thucydides' trap, which may further escalate globally. What we seek is not necessarily a decisive outcome, but rather a long-lasting and mutually acceptable consequence in the South China Sea. This is easier said than done, for to achieve that end state, sacrifices need to be made and concessions need to be given, perhaps at the expense of national sovereignty, which is non-negotiable in principle. Additionally, the intervention of extra-regional actors would further intensify the situation, complicating an already complex environment. For that, international organizations such as the United Nations, International Maritime Organization, and international judiciary bodies should be empowered to arbitrate on the issue as espoused in the UNCLOS 3. Finally, it is pertinent to resolve the South China Sea issue on an equal playing field, which means that a rule-based approach and universal recognized principles of international law such the UNCLOS should be at the forefront. To paraphrase the author, Alvin Toffler, the solution should be rule-based and not through brute force. I am reminded of Winston Churchill's remarks that meeting jaw to jaw is better than war. The issue of South China Sea is best resolved diplomatically. That notwithstanding, the prolonged diplomacy to achieve a lasting solution must not be hijacked to justify aggressive posturing or the launching of an arms race to gain strategic advantage. International organizations such as the UN and ASEAN should ensure status quo until an accepted solution is achieved. Similarly, the military should be employed to further enhance confidence-building measures and conflict prevention amongst the various armed forces. The volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity inherent in the South China Sea issue compel the formulation of a wide spectrum of responses, including the notion of attaining decisive result through the use of military forces. History has attested that in the face of complexity, even the improbable will become possible and crucial over time. In this sense, I am thankful that the National Resilience College has organized this webinar on a subject which is front and center in the global and regional geostrategy. I sincerely hope that impressive body of panelists with the eminent moderator will be able to deliberate and formulate a solution on the issue comprehensively and succinctly. I wish you a rewarding and fruitful webinar and let the discussion bear mutually beneficial fruit for all of us. Thank you. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
We thank Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri for his keynote address. To moderate the discussion is Professor Adam Leong, who is the Deputy Director of Research, Center for Defense and International Security Studies from the National Defense University of Malaysia. To start the webinar session, with great pleasure, I will now hand over this event over to you, Professor Adam Leong.
Thank you very much, General Amir, yang berbahagia Tan Sri, Datuk-Datuk, distinguished panelists, and gentlemen. Before we start our panel session today, I would like to remind all that we are following Chatham House rules in which the participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers nor that of any other participant may be revealed. I would like to take a few moments to introduce our distinguished speakers today. Our first speaker today is Mr. Hariza Hasri, who is currently the Chief Executive Officer for the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ISIS Malaysia. Mr. Hariza has worked in various think tanks and public policy consulting firms internationally and in Malaysia. In 2004, Mr. Hariza managed the International Election Observation Mission for the Afghanistan presidential election. From 2009 to 2013, Mr. Hariza served as a member of the International Control Group, ICG, at peace talks between the government of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, MILF, which led to the signing of the framework agreement on the Bangsa Moro. He has also published 3 books on election observation and electoral politics. Our second speaker this morning is Emeritus Professor Kalai Thayer from School of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of New South Wales, Canberra, Australia. He is also the director of Thayer Consultancy that provides political analysis. Professor Thayer has served in various capacities in numerous universities and research centers, including Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies at Hawaii, Australian National University, Deakin University, Yale University, and the International Institute of Strategic Studies, IISS, or better known as Chatham House. He has published more than 500 academic publications, including books, monographs, book chapters, and journal articles. Our third speaker today is Dr. Adina Binti Kamarudin, the Director General at the Maritime Affairs Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Malaysia. She is involved in maritime boundary negotiations, South China Sea maritime security and safety issues, United Nations related law of the sea, and ASEAN. Dr. Adina has served in various departments in Wisma Putra, such as the Southeast Asian Desk and the Inspectorate Division. Her overseas posting included a stint at the United Nations General Assembly and Malaysia's embassies at Dublin and Frankfurt. She holds a PhD in international law, and she is now heading the Malaysian delegation to the ASEAN-China Joint Working Group on the implementation of the Declaration of Conduct and the Code of Conduct. We are so lucky and privileged to have such distinguished speakers with us this morning. I'm sure we will have an interesting session today. Usually the moderator will abuse his position and give a longer talk than the speakers, but I'm not going to do that this morning. Please, I would like to invite Mr. Hariza to give his talk for this morning. Mr. Hariza, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Adam. I was wondering whether if we can put up my slides. Thank you. Well, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I'd like to thank the National Resilient College for their kind invitation for me to speak in this Statesman webinar on thinking the unthinkable, decisive action in the South China Sea. Now, this is a challenging topic to deal with, mainly because there are 2 parts to the topic, and they don't really connect with each other. In many ways, it's like my first date, and many other dates for that matter, until obviously I found my wonderful wife. Thinking the unthinkable is the same category of phrases such as pondering the imponderable and to give it your 110%. They are, by definition and in logical terms, impossible. Decisive actions, on the other hand, needs surety. The probability to be absolutely sure when it's unthinkable is pretty low. However, I accepted this gracious invitation to speak this morning because I'm fully aware that we use such hyperbolic expressions not in order to make undue demands, but to suggest that the situation calls for a rethink of what we usually consider to be thinkable, ponderable, and possible. In short, this is indeed an invitation to re-examine our fundamentals assumptions. My presentation this morning will be in 3 parts, just like the Newton's law of motion. Now, in all likelihood, you probably have not spent much time this morning thinking that the fundamental laws of motion in physics will be the overarching theme of my talk on South China Sea. Fair enough. Just like how the nature of the second law of thermodynamics or the concepts of entropy doesn't make the best breakfast talk. The first part of my presentation will be a brief assessment on the Malaysian perspective on the South China Sea. To put it differently, what are the attitudes that underlie our analysis? The second part will be to suggest where the unthinkable, imponderable, and inconceivable might have happened. I do not do so in relation to specific events in the South China Sea, whether anticipated or otherwise. Instead, I intend to suggest that we need to frame our foreign and defense policies so that we are able to rapidly improvise, adapt, and maneuver in response to geostrategic changes. In the third and the final part, I suggest how we need organizations that will be able to support efforts to make us nimbler and decisive actor in the international affairs. Let's go to my first slide, which is already there. How should we assess the situation in the South China Sea? For this, I do not intend to go into the excruciating details of how we got to where we are. That would not be a productive use of our time. Instead, it is important we examine how we think about what is happening in the South China Sea. Anyway, I mean those of us in the Malaysian foreign policy and security establishment, a wide category that includes our political leadership, government officials, commentators, and the academia. Thinking about thinking is important, and it is the first step in any re-examination of fundamental assumptions. The starting point here is to note that for Malaysia, the situation in South China Sea, as we know it today, did not truly manifest until around 2013. Now, this is not to dismiss or downplay the events that took place before that year. Certainly, serious consultations between Malaysia and other claimants of the South China Sea began well before 2013. The publication of Peta Baru in 1979, for instance, formalized Malaysia's claim in the area and drastically expanded the space of the Malaysian armed forces had to secure and defend. Malaysia began to garrison the maritime features within its claims in 1983, starting with Pulau Layang-Layang. But the character of the South China Sea dispute that we see today is more of a recent vintage, at least from the Malaysian experience. It was not until about 2013 that we began to see how this has become a persistent presence by the vessels of the People's Republic of China in Malaysia's exclusive economic zone. This primarily involves the China Coast Guard, but it is occasionally complemented by the People's Liberation Army Navy. Prior to 2013, China's ability to project power was more restricted, but has now developed the capacity to maintain a long-term presence away from its bases in Hainan Islands, as well as the Chinese mainland. the building of artificial islands in the South China Sea has also enabled Chinese vessels to minimize the distances they need to travel for refueling, replenishment, and repairs. It is clear that Malaysia was shielded from the full brunt of contestations in the South China Sea for a long time. It's simply as a result of sheer distance. For many decades prior to that, intense conflict in the South China Sea was pretty much limited to the northern parts of the South China Sea. It was there where Vietnam and China engaged in the Battle of Parasols in 74 and the Johnson-Southwest Skirmish in 88. And this was where we witnessed the mischief reef incident in 95 between the Philippines and China. So the question is, will the past Vietnam and Philippines experience be Malaysia's future? Now, I don't think that is necessarily the case. But I think that Malaysian policymakers and commentators need to learn from the experience of these two countries. For too long, the prevailing sense has been that Malaysia has a different kind of relationship with China, that Beijing has treated us differently, and that we have succeeded in differentiating ourselves from Vietnam and the Philippines. If there is at all any truth to Malaysia's apparent success in developing a more cordial relationship with Beijing, it needs to be tempered by the simple fact that China has not been able to truly assert its claims in the southern reaches of the South China Sea until only relatively recently. Another consequence of our post-2013 prism is that we have witnessed the intensification of the South China Sea dispute that take place in tandem with the growing rivalry between the US and China. As a result, there is a tendency for us to see South China Sea as a dispute, a product, and a consequence of major power rivalry. While there is no doubt that South China Sea dispute is deeply entangled in Sino-US rivalry, to view it primarily in such terms would result in a gross simplification of the matter. The dispute, as experienced by Malaysia, is also about relations between Malaysia and China. Another dimension would be Malaysia's relations with her neighbors, the other Southeast Asian claimants, Brunei, the Philippines, and Vietnam. To cast South China Sea dispute as being all or primarily about competition between the US and China would be to deny the Southeast Asian claimants who also have agency. We cannot afford to have such a lacuna in our analysis. Next slide, please. And this brings me to part 2 of my presentation. Where does the unthinkable, imponderable, and inconceivable need to happen? One approach is to anticipate what the future holds and prepare for it as best as we can. In the context of South China Sea, that would entail listing down several likely scenarios and thinking through how we might be able to deal with them. There is value in such an exercise, which I think needs to happen behind closed doors, where we can be frank, open, and explicit about the specific responses that Malaysia might be able to take. Another approach, which I will adopt here, is to prepare for future contingencies and possibilities in more general terms. In other words, the question is not what we ought to do when a particular country takes a certain course of action. Instead, the question is how we position ourselves so that we are able to respond effectively. The answer to that might involve sacrificing what I think has become a sacred cow in the Malaysian foreign policy, non-alignment. This does not mean that we should leave the non-alignment movement. Many countries that are a lot less attached to the non-alignment remain active members of the non-alignment movement. Nor does it amount to advocating that Malaysia should enter into an alliance with any particular country. There is hardly any appetite for such a move in the Malaysian body politic. Similarly, there is hardly any desire for such kinds of relationship among the major powers today. But there is a growing sense that non-alignment has, over the years, become less of a strategy and more of an ideology. It is easy to see how this happened. Malaysia's commitment to not taking sides has been our DNA, even from the time before ASEAN. For decades, we have diagnosed problems in the region by viewing them through the lens of a bystander that gets swept up in the conflict. To wit, the real issue is portrayed as competition between the major powers. We are not seen as an actor with a role play, but instead we see ourselves as the victim being on the defense. This was the root of the 71 proposal for a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. The ZOC Fund proposal, as initially presented by Malaysia, was to neutralize Southeast Asia through major power guarantees. It was not entirely realistic back then. It is certainly not realistic in today's context. Fundamentally, the reason that non-alignment harms policy making in Malaysia is twofold. From my lens, first, it limits the courses of action that we would be willing to contemplate. As senior military officers, I'm pretty sure many of you attending this course at the NRC will have experienced instances where non-alignment has narrowed the range of policy options that are available to decision makers in the Malaysian Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defense. Second, a stubborn insistence on non-alignment sometimes sends the wrong signals to our neighbors as well as to the major powers. It enables them to assume that Malaysian policy would always be subjected to a certain inertia. But this is precisely the time for us to be nimble and flexible. Therefore, if we are subjected to intense pressure in the South China Sea, we should be able to adapt accordingly, even if it means emphasizing relations with one major power or another. A non-alignment strategy cannot be an ideology that we are bound to following to the point it become restrictive. Rather, a nimble and flexible approach is worth exploring, one that lets us forge connections and make decisions that are in our best interests. Non-alignment can be harmful to domestic interests when the way we say no to one power to avoid offending another. This is not foreign policy. Foreign policy is about flexibility, not letting non-alignment guide us into what is essentially foreclosing on our options. Let's go to the next slide. Now allow me to get to the point where I will drive all of this back to the old good Isaac Newton and Rupert Glacius. Isaac Newton's first law states that an object either remains at rest or continues to move at a constant velocity unless it is acted upon by an external force. To think that we enjoy a certain good relationship, or to suggest that the South China Sea dispute as a product and consequence of major power rivalry means that we are literally accepting the fact that we are driven by external forces. Now for physics, this is logical because objects have no control over their own course. Imagine a pendulum. It does not create its own force. In politics, however, it's the opposite. We have the ability to generate our own force. If we think scientifically that we are within an isolated system, like in thermodynamics, the concepts of entropy, a term borrowed from the Greek word transformation, creates this force. Entropy in this sense happens when we apply Newton's second law. Newton's second law states the rate of change of momentum of a body over time is directly proportional to the force applied. To build our momentum, we need to build our force. And by using the word force, I'm not suggesting that we build our military might, for that has an adverse effect. This shall be clearer when I make the connection to Newton's third law shortly. Building our force in this sense is to build our own strategic capabilities through knowledge and the ability to fully understand, use, and manipulate technology and data. This will enable us to apply scientific and evidence-based in strategic planning. This requires a change in how we do things. To do this, we have to move away from concepts that restricts our own ability. Finally, we must begin to have a serious conversation about, and should the unthinkable happen, can we implement the measures that would see decisive action? Newton's third law holds that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. To express the truth to the context of our discussion, this morning is simply by putting it as the pendulum always swings back in the other direction. Whatever we do or not do, we have to be prepared to deal with the pendulum when it swings to or back to our direction. To be prepared, we need cultural and organizational shifts that will enable us to think about and foresee the unthinkable and implement the strategies that arise from this exercise. At the risk of repeating myself, flexibility is key. Agile governance is an important avenue to adaptation of foreign and defense policies so we can respond swiftly to changes. As long as we have the metrics that is in place to gauge outcomes, we can eschew and overemphasize focus on documentation and processes and instead focus on results, while of course still being compliant with international laws and regulations. Ladies and gentlemen, to do this, we must not only rely on the agencies that deal exclusively on foreign policy, diplomacy, and security, but also look into the other disciplines, apply a multidisciplinary approach, and create institutional programs that are able to do this thinking. The multidisciplinary approach at ISIS, for instance, plays a role in sparking dialogue, while the National Resilience College can make use of young talent to ideate applications of strategies learned. Honored participants, maritime security leans heavily on resilience, yes, but also definitely flexibility. Long-term goals remains the same, but the methodology must be dynamic, statecraft-tuned to the implementation of measures that will let us achieve these goals rather than focus on processes. In the end, be it Isaac Newton or Rudolf Clausius, it is the wisdom behind their theorem that fundamentally changed the world. With that, I thank you for your attention and hand the session over back to the moderator. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harisa. What a fascinating talk. You certainly put it very accurately that we have to think the unthinkable in a sense that what do we do next if what we have been practicing thus far doesn't produce the outcomes that we desire. I'm sure we'll have some exciting discussions regarding some of your points that you have highlighted just now. We will now move on to our second speaker today, Emeritus Professor Thayer. Professor Thayer, if you are ready, please, you may begin. The screen is yours.
Thank you, moderator. I'd like to begin, and I hope my slides are up, thank you, by thanking Major General Rahim, the head of academics at the National Resilience College, for the invitation to address you. I wouldn't ordinarily think of talking about Malaysia unless I was invited to do so. Next slide. I plan to approach this by setting out the problem that Malaysia faces and suggest a whole of government response that coordinates diplomacy, information, media, law enforcement, and international law, and in the end suggest a strategy of preemption and discuss at the very end of that the kind of risks that Malaysia would take. Next slide, please. The problem. Malaysia's sovereign jurisdiction, that's control over its own resources and its exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, are being violated by foreign flag vessels. And China illegally claims features in Malaysian waters on the basis of historic rights. James Shoal would be an example. And China conducts illegal surveys in Malaysia exclusive economic zone. And China permanently stations Coast Guard vessels in Malaysian water and harasses legitimate oil and gas commercial operations by Petronas. No action and not acting decisively will make this matter worse because China's maritime power is slated to grow much more larger than it is at present in coming year. Now, I'm not here to advocate force. Decisive action, when it must be taken by maritime law enforcement or in self-defense, from a Malaysian perspective, should be in accord with national law and international law and be proportional to the threat that's being faced. Next slide, please. I'm suggesting a whole of government response, and this is not business as usual. The situation is urgent because it is going to get worse and major power rivalry will intensify. The whole of government response means assertive action across a number of fronts that are coordinated at the highest level, the National Security Council executive. Whatever word you use, I think a special task force with a key leader, Supremo Czar, whatever they want to call him, in charge, that has extensive experience in both military and foreign affairs to carry out this whole of government response. The strategy must be long-term, gradual, not confrontational, asymmetric, and multi-pronged. And I've suggested diplomacy, information, law enforcement, international law, and with military forces. And long-term military forces means to look at the kind of posture you need by your military and to begin looking at equipment and technology purposes that suits and reinforces the strategy. Next slide, please. The strategy has to begin with diplomacy, and I start with China. Malaysia must maintain constant diplomatic engagement with China at all times, not just as business as usual, because this strategy will be influenced by that. And that channel should be used to prep China, prepare it for Malaysia's future actions, so that China isn't blindsided. You don't have to reveal your own secrets or moves ahead of time, but you shift. You let them know there's a shift in thinking and action. Another is to try to engage China on bilateral discussion on maritime issues in the dispute. If not already being undertaken, Vietnam has 3 working groups that have been into their 15th meetings. So working groups and then senior officials. China prefers bilateral, but this is, again, part of the strategy. And to continue to lodge diplomatic protests in response to illegal activities in Malaysian waters. And we have a record of over 150 some odd Philippine complaints, but this is to show you are not acquiescing and make them part of the public record. Next slide, please. Diplomacy with Southeast Asian states. Constantly brief and exchange information on Chinese activities with other ASEAN members, especially the littoral states. And here is to move beyond just normal exchanges of views, but to try to develop common tasking requirements. So each can help reinforce the other. Initiate discussions with other members of the 5 power defense arrangements. Now, some of those suggestions may be pie in the sky, but they're part of an information or shaping that puts doubt in China's mind about the lack of resistance that it may face to its assertiveness and coercion. The timing and location of maritime exercises, and later I'll raise that in the strategy of preemption. Extending the area of defense to East Malaysia, to think about it and initiate that, or make clear that the waters that Malaysia claims are covered. Continue talking about extending membership or observer status to Brunei. and offer basing facilities to the United Kingdom now that it's out of Brexit and seems to be looking at that. If the FPA members go along, fine. But if they don't, it's to keep these discussions alive, to put doubt in China's mind as to whether its actions might actually precipitate further action by FPDA members. Next slide, please. For the maritime powers, now is a ripe time. Fluidity with the Biden administration, Japan and Australia, comprehensive strategic partnership with Malaysia, enter in discussions about the common responses to China's challenges to the rules-based order. More on that in the strategy. Now here, I take the two scenarios based on what happened a year ago when China harassed Petronas explorations and the US Navy, and reportedly an Australian ship later, monitored the situation. Do you want that to occur as a regular feature? Are you happy with it? I didn't see many protests, but did the US give advance notice? Did they not? They show up. Do you want, when incidents occur, the US to show up and monitor? Or can you discuss ahead of time to coordinate US operations? This is part of my strategy of preemption, to let them know you're about to resume oil exploration and you would welcome their presence there, and you work out standard operating procedures. A third option, and I've heard about this, but I'm not fully briefed on it, is the Rider program, and I think it's being considered for the Philippines, where a senior Royal Malaysian Naval officer would be on an American ship and would be empowered to ask for certain assistance in agreed circumstances. So that command decision could be made right there. Next slide, please. Continuing multilateral diplomacy, we heard this, and it's no need to go into great detail, but we have to alter ASEAN's declaratory policy. The last time Malaysia was chair, my understanding was it helped alter it by making sure the joint statements included the views of all participants rather than trying to reach a consensus view that overcame differences. So to be quite explicit about the concern over what activities are taking place. Among defense ministers to use that for coordination in Malaysia to press its strategy, to enlist dialogue partner and through the ADMM Plus, the ASEAN Regional Forum to spotlight issues. In other words, the czar of a task force is taking business as usual and giving it a focus to use information, politics, and political pressure to achieve an end. The enlarged ASEAN Maritime Forum, the East Asia Summit, particularly at the Leaders Retreat, and the non-aligned movement, because China always waters down the statement by ASEAN as a regional organization within the non-aligned movement. And finally, a novel idea that I have is the Quad emerges as part of the regional architecture. And to prevent a single country in ASEAN from being singled out for joining the Quad or being made an observer, I suggest as part of that strategy that Malaysia to encourage other ASEAN members to have an institutional arrangement. An ASEAN +3 in economics with China and Japan should be paralleled with the ASEAN +4, where the Quad meets ASEAN institution to institution. The use of all these multilateral forums should be to challenge China's narrative, to expose China's actions, and to build coalitions. Next slide. Information and media, this is extraordinarily important. To document all illegal and unreported, unregulated fishing incidents by actions by foreign Coast Guard, maritime militia, and other intrusions. Of course, I know that information is being gathered, but we now need to weaponize it, make it a sharp end. The Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative in Washington is a body I recommend cooperating with, because resources of the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam needed to be added to create a real picture. And we need to put this in the public domain. Enlist the cooperation of MEMA, the Maritime Institute, ISIS Malaysia, represented here today, to have their researchers become specialized in aiding this effort. It's to identify the numbers on the the fishing boats and the maritime militia Coast Guard ship. But for the fishing boats, which province do they come ship? Which companies own them? And where does the fish go? Because the EU has issued a yellow card to Vietnam for fishing illegally. And I'm aiming for this strategy that China could find its fishing ban from major markets abroad if it's from illegal areas, and this needs to be documented. Annual reports, the transparency, putting it on the record, using multiple languages, and to present papers to international and regional conferences. I've attended over 80 in the last 10 years, by my count. The Malaysian case is always very quiet. It needs to go there to challenge the narrative and present the details of what's occurring and to influence opinion makers. Next slide, please. So a media strategy is to cultivate and nurture journalists with a defense and security specialization in Malaysia, in the region, internationally. Take them to sea. Vietnam did that very effectively in confrontations in 2014. Let them video, let them report. There was a BBC man that went out to Bagasa Island in the Philippines, Scarborough Shoal, and that's shown up and has gone viral. To brief these journalists, so to keep it, to build up support at home, which is part of your defense strategy, but also for the region. Slightly allied from this is to cultivate NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and civil society in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, and assist them in reporting on the threats to the marine environment. The very first thing that the Declaration on Conduct of Party is for, to report on threats to the marine resources and the environment, because China is the major culprit, and we're seeing data like that all the time. But this is to change the narrative and put China on the defensive. Now, this is more academic, but it's also important to fund historical research of the South China Sea to counter China's historic rights narrative. They were the first to discover, name, occupy, and administer every feature in the South China Sea, and everybody is robbing China of its resources. If that's the case, how could James Shoal be Chinese when it's 20, 30 meters under the water? So I'd like to see more research on the pre-colonial era as part of the information warfare campaign, but to sponsor it and encourage scholars to do a top-rate job on that. We must influence the opinion makers and use them in various countries. Next slide. The next lever of this strategy is law enforcement, and it must be done under Malaysian laws and in line with international law and conventions. But IUUF has got to be addressed. I've talked before, the need to document the activities, video, AIS tracking. Begin a low-key campaign. This is the decisive action. You don't want to confront 200 boats, but by knowing and having great domain awareness, you can isolate and begin to arrest or expel where there are small numbers of foreign vessels, Chinese, for fishing illegally in your waters. And you can cooperate with nearby countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, as appropriate. And then when vessels flee arrest, Indonesia has done this with Thai vessels, report it to Interpol so they can ban those ships from showing up. Unlikely they'll go to the artificial islands or back to China, but it's all part of the campaign to put China on the defensive. And as I mentioned before, once you have the details and you know where the illegal fish is being sold, whether in Europe or elsewhere around the world, you try to get them to ban the import of illegally fished maritime resources. Next slide, please. Now, international law. We've heard repeated reference to that. There should be a caucus of literal states. That's happened before, but Brunei wouldn't participate. But first, I think as part of the strategy, ASEAN needs to operate without China and begin to put its own house in order. The China dispute is another dimension, but there are disputes over delimitation, illegal fishing, continental shelf. They should be resolved, or if they can, under UNCLOS, practical measures of a practical nature should be adopted. Set aside the sovereignty disputes, but begin to do it, because it just shows China you're considering each other's claims valid and you can deal with them. And then I suggest a Southeast Asia Code of Conduct, and I've done it before. And the argument is as follows. The ASEAN Treaty, Southeast Asia Nuclear-Free Zone Treaty, is the only treaty I'm aware of that defines the geographic scope of Southeast Asia, and the current Code of Conduct with China does not. And it includes the continental shelves and exclusive economic zones of all the states. Now, this could be in dispute, but in other words, that ASEAN corporately has an interest in seeing that the claimed EEZs and continental shelves are not altered without the consent of the party concerned. So yes, you accept Vietnam's EEZ, and ASEAN should say that if it's going to be altered because of a conflict with China, it should be done peacefully, and the two parties should agree and under international law. And the reason you make it all of Southeast Asia is that just a code of conduct for a small part of the South China Sea means that once you're outside that, you could misbehave, coerce, and ram. But it also means bringing on board Myanmar, which is a literal state in Southeast Asia, Thailand, and Cambodia. And so it regulates the behavior not only of the ASEAN members, but their outside powers, and you make it open to protocols of accession like the ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. So the ASEAN-China Code of Conduct, it's at the moment is lacking a definition of geographic area, legal status, enforcement, and the role of third parties. And again, as part of Malaysia's strategy, it's to broaden the geographic area, give it a legal status, ensure that there is some enforcement measure, and where China doesn't want anybody else to be involved, open it to accession by third parties. And always keep the option open of taking legal action under UNCLOS. Again, keep China guessing. Next slide. Now to get to in the last conclusion here, my strategy of preemption. Again, use lawful force, make it proportionate, and it's the last resort. What do I mean by preemption? Anticipate what China is going to do, occupy the maritime space, and leave it to China to have to take the unthinkable. So you coordinate your commercial oil and gas operations with deployment. You find out from Petronas when they're going to hire a contract ship, when are they going to begin operations, and you forward deploy your maritime law enforcement and or naval vessels to that area. You overfly the space with helicopters and reconnaissance aircraft. So you want to dominate that space and indicate it's under Malaysia's sovereign jurisdiction. To prepare for that, then you have to look at your force posture and your basing. Is it adequate to support those operations for a sustained period? And then thoroughly document all encounters and have them publicized as part of that information warfare. Next strategy, next slide, please. Next part of my strategy. Now you also consult with the United States, Australia, and Japan to see if they can join them and even rotate in or out, so you have a presence of FPDA partners and other friendly external states. And you can coordinate Coast Guards, Australia doesn't have them, with nations that do, and naval presence deployments. And they could occur around Laconia breakers, James Shoal, or wherever else. And you can conduct, occupy, preempt by timing naval exercises to coincide with oil and gas activity. And then the US Congress passed legislation banning Chinese officials involved in environmental destruction and building artificial islands, and China's national offshore oil company. And I know Malaysia said it wouldn't follow it, but I'm saying another aspect of the strategy is either you prep China by telling them if they keep behaving, you'll have no choice but to help the United States in not dealing with CNOC, or doing it yourself through national legislation. So be considering that if other countries take legal initiatives to punish China for its behavior, think of supporting that as well. And I would be remiss, and I'm right on time, last slide, to say there is the risk that China will take a leaf out of its book the way they're treating Australia right now and conduct an information warfare campaign against Malaysia, freezing ministerial contacts, imposing economic sanctions or targeted Malaysian exports to China, restrict Chinese tourism to Malaysia, and step up intimidation at sea through gray zone operations by harassing Petronas, your law enforcement, and naval vessels. So you have to ponder that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Taylor. You have highlighted some critical points. I'm sure the participants today will have some stimulating discussions after this in the question and answer session. Let's move on to our final speaker this morning, Dr. Adina. Please, Dr. Adina, if you are ready, you may begin.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and thank you to Professor Adam, Tan Sri, Dato, and fellow participants, and I know also the academicians are in here today, so good morning to all of you. I just like to start with a short prayer, and that's what I do even when I negotiate or whatever my welcoming remarks, or even when I open any session. This prayer, I think, is significant now, taking into account numbers of the pandemic, and also just start with that. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, 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 la yadurru ma'asmihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis sama'i wa huwa as-sami'ul 'alim. The funny thing about this particular webinar, I'm not able to see myself when I talk, so first time for me. So anyway, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to the NRC for organizing and thinking of me. And I'm very, very glad to be sitting, next to virtually to the two luminaries. We have Mr. Harizal, the CEO of ISIS, and also Professor Carl Thayer. So Professor Carl Thayer, I grew up watching you on the podium. So it is indeed a great letter day today that I'm sitting together with you and delivering my own version of this particular topic. So first, I would like to say that I have to recognize the fact that this particular webinar today has taken the approach of one track 1.5, where you have the track 1, which meaning us from the agencies which are directly involved, and also the track 2, the academician, Professor Emeritus, of course, and the think tank of ISIS. So it's a good approach to have both. And of course, I would like just to say about my Chatham House rule that I have to adhere to, and which the moderator had also mentioned. So basically, so is that it? How can I look at that? So can we go to the first, my first slide? I have thematic slide. So you won't find most words there. The words are coming out from my mouth. So we have this, I just like to look at this topic. Again, I think my colleague, or sorry, my fellow panelists, Mr. Harizal, had looked at it, and I feel it's the same. I'm looking at something which is the extreme end of each other, thinking the unthinkable. When people say thinking the unthinkable, they're always, looking at what is the nuclear option? Is a nuclear option coming in? And I don't mean nuclear power, I'm just saying about nuclear option. The way to go, perhaps it's decisive action in terms of military, or some irritants that can cause and escalate into something else. And then you look at the end of the spectrum, decisive action. So looking at this, do you think the unthinkable is about decisive action, or that decisive action could be something unthinkable? So that's how I'm going to begin, and I like to go straight to the slides. I want to show why the South China Sea has been, still is, and will always be flashpoints in this region. I think we can move to the second slide. Look at this. This is a claim to the South China Sea, and I must make a qualifier that I took this from public knowledge. So don't say something that we've prepared on this, okay? So basically, when you look at this, you're looking at a very, some sort of semi-enclosed region of this particular body of waters, okay? And yet you have some of the most excessive claims in that area, some of the most overlapping claims in that area on how countries would interpret international law, for example, in 1982 UNCLOS. If you see the red lines there, and I don't mean exact red lines, but that particular red line shows Malaysian claim, yeah? Yes, and then you have the, if you look at the blue, I think you're going to move that blue line in the middle between EEZ Indonesia. You have Indonesia's claim from the NKRI, and you can see that they have said that they are not claimant state, but their waters are also there through their line. And of course, we have the Philippines claim. So we have the Vietnamese claim a lot, and then you have finally the South China Sea, the Chinese claim. Okay, there you go. Okay, I move to the next slide. Okay, so you have different claims. So from my study and scholastic research, there are, when you talk about claims or any regional issues on maritime, when you talk about overlapping claims, be it from the bilateral or multilateral or multi-state parties, you're looking at actually horizontal claims and also the vertical claims. So if you look at, for example, I'm just talking about ASEAN and China here. So we have, who are the vertical claimants? We have China, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Brunei, okay? And then these are the players or the actual claimants to the issue. Then you have, coming down is the stakeholder or the vertical claims, which mean within each state, for all 5 states, we have different claimants there because they have different interests. You have the citizens and its interests, citizen nationalism. Then you have the Maritime Enforcement Agency, Naval Force. And then, you have the Coast Guard, you have the Naval Force, you have the fishermen, you have merchants, and you have tourism, and you have interests at stake here for different level of the stakeholder, vertical stakeholders. And what are they? National interests, security, safety, resources, and also the environment. So when you look at the South China Sea, we can't really just look at the the surface of who the claimants are. We have to look at it in terms of the vertical stakeholders. Now, Harizal, I don't have your acumen for physics and all, but so mine is very straightforward. But I like the thermodynamics notion that you came up with, and I have my own circular thermodynamics. You'll see in a while, Mr. Harizal. So then you look at this South China Sea. So again, horizontal, vertical, then you have the other stakeholders. Who are they? They are third parties, the user states, countries looking into the region. Then you have shipping companies, you have communication, you have transport companies. And why do I raise this? It's because you're looking back on how you want the sea. We keep saying we want South China Sea should be for peace, security, stability, and also commercial. So these are the interests. When we mention these words are not just hollow. They have all the interests and agenda within, in its meaning, within those words. And you look at other interests as well. Earlier, I mentioned about other user states, and I think Professor Carl Thayer also, I think, touched on this. There's other interests in the region, particularly in the South China Sea. You have countries looking at it with their own interests of Indo-Pacific, free, open, and safe. Then you also have China and its belt and road initiatives. Then you have India looking at us with the Act East policy. And then, of course, then the equation of the Quad. And then most recently, you have the European outlook on Indo-Pacific. So all this, bear in mind first, and I'll just put it when I'll show you my own circular thermodynamics structure or model, and you can see where this will come in. Okay, so can I go to the next one? Okay, when I have this, my mother keeps saying that I have, when I was growing up, I have this handwriting like a doctor. when doctor gives their prescription, you don't really know how to read it. I think I do, but I'm not a medical doctor, a different kind of doctor. So I'm trying to read my own notes. But let me cut back. So I was talking about the stakeholders, different stakeholders. So I'll go to my first part, the cross-cutting issues. So when you talk about law of the sea, or you talk about maritime safety and security, you look and you talk about the interest in the ocean. There's not one body that can say that we're better or we claim more. Our interest is actually higher than those of it. And that's why law of the sea, you look at it, you're going to think about spatial, you have to think about security, you have to think about safety, you have to think about environment and also strategic interest. And that's why I like, what Professor Carl Thayer mentioned, whole of government issues. And this has also been something that we are doing, also practicing, trying to get the whole of government issues to be coordinated. And that's very important, to be coordinated. And sometimes when it's approached fragmentedly without coordination from the agency, that's where we tend to see the gaps or the reaction to certain issues. We could have done better had the whole of government issues and the coordinations are all on point. Then I look back at multi-stakeholders. They're states again. And so it's all related. So my secular model of thermodynamics, the result is very, related, and it's secular, and it's something that you can't do without the other. So multi-stakeholders, states, commerce, coastal communities. So that's why we have to ask the question again. When we want to do something which is unthinkable, if military is the only option, how does this affect the states, commerce, coastal communities when we do something that could escalate situation in the ocean, for example? And then you look at sources and resources and capabilities. So when we approach the issue of law of the sea and also on overlapping claims or excessive claims, you have to look back on the nexus. And maritime security and safety, for example, you have to look back at the nexus of land and sea. Whatever starts at land will somehow, come at sea, and whatever happens in the sea may end up at land. So that's why it's not a fragmented approach, it's a whole of government approach. So if you're saying that the defense forces, for example, just for those who are doing enforcement and monitoring at sea, no, it'll come back to some of the armed forces and defense forces that we come back through land. And this you could see in the latest, certain situation that we have now, trying to put a lid or manage the situation on the ground in terms of COVID-19 and migration and all that. So then you look at resources. Resources, there are, of course, the non-living resources, and then there's the living resources. The living resources, I think Professor Carl Thayer also mentioned on the IIU, this itself is an important issue, and it's not just us and China, it's us and the neighbors. You saw the overlapping claims in this area. So we have IUU issues as well, overfishing with our neighbors, and we just can't say that China is the only one. We have next to our neighbors also. I think that we are managing the situation. Our people on the ground, our enforcement, for example, our maritime coast guard are also managing the situation on the ground. So whether we want to do an unthinkable, when we have something within us rather than us in one country, this is how we have to look at the South China Sea. Geopolitical and capabilities. This is one of the most important things as well. It's good to say that we have to do this, we have to do that. But what are our capabilities? Capabilities are not just hardware, software, and also human resources. How do we make sure that in thinking the unthinkable and making the decisive action, these are the things that we also have to look into and how do I say, beefed up and strengthened. So now look at the geopolitical interest again. That's where I said about there's the issue of other countries are also looking into this area. Why? Because this is a sea for trade as well, commerce, and it's not something that those who have claims will cut off the others, because there are many uses of the sea. There's also under the UNCLOS, freedom of navigation, yes, as long as, I think like Harizal mentioned earlier, it's not a military build up in that area, and as long as it's allowed under UNCLOS, something that countries will exercise in the area. So basically that. And then we're looking at there's 4 claimant states and in ASEAN and 5, and then China. And when we look at claimant states, we still have the South China Sea being discussed in ASEAN Forum. So although we have the claimant states, there are also ASEAN countries there who have their interest in the regional peace, regional stability in this area. So where, for example, certain things can get heated up between claimant states, certain countries, for example, we also recognize some of the contribution from other countries in trying to manage the situation in the ground, looking at ASEAN as the bigger picture. Now, UNCLOS, you look at UNCLOS. Again, there's 2 issues, as my fellow, learned panelists have mentioned. There's 2. There's territorial and maritime issues there. And then there's also conduct. That's why we have the DOC, we have and we're looking now at the COC. So, and then we have the issue of settlement of disputes. How then, there's an issue because the recognition of dispute itself, where are those disputes now? For example, for Malaysia, if you look at some of our documents that we have sent to the UN, for example, there are places or a segment of the sea that we say that we don't have disputes. So how does that look for the settlement of dispute? So that's another issue. And then you look at power projection and confidence building. This is where it's related to geopolitical interests and the claimant states as well. And you look at the importance of confidence building measure, because I don't think without, how can we call for peace, stability, when there's always bad faith among claimants or non-claimants or other superpowers, for example, or those with excessive claims, for example. So you need this confidence building. So this confidence building is actually entrenched in the DOC document itself. So if you look at it, some of it is on really on confidence building measure. And how do we do it? So since it was signed in 2002, for example, we have this para particularly or agenda. When we meet, we talk about possibilities or where program of such elements are built up. So we have every year 4, 5 issues, even in marine environment, in maritime law enforcement, many things that could actually provide the platform for countries to talk about some issues, and also you can understand where they're coming from, okay? And I like to talk about this not only in the DOC, in the ASEAN Forum, as Professor Thea has also mentioned, we have the ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum, and this is a good forum because it's on basically confidence building measure. And we have actually engaged, co-chair with other countries, for example, our dialogue partners, Malaysia. In the recent years, I think we co-chair about 4 of these confidence building measure under the ARF. I think 2 was with, I think 3 Australia. We had with you 3, 1 in 2018 National Maritime Single Point of Contact. So that also touches on some of what you have said, which is what we're doing as well. Then we went, that was America, Australia and us. And then later we went on to do the maritime security and international law. That was Malaysia and Australia. And then the last one that I could travel last year abroad was in Timor-Leste. And that one we did with Australia, Timor-Leste and Malaysia. That was good as well because it was on settlement of dispute, learning some lessons on settlement of dispute, trying to see whether it could be used for South China Sea. On the Australian and Timor-Leste experience of conciliation. So there is this form of where we counter power projection with confidence building measures. Okay, now I come to, of course, this is very serious, very sensitive, sovereignty and sovereign rights. So when we look at this, no country will start off by agreeing to give an inch. Well, that is something that you have to, I think, realize, we all have to realize, the giving of inch or a meter. So sovereignty will always be the issue that will keep is pumped by nationalism, national interest. And it's not something that will start, naturally with countries meeting halfway. And that's sovereignty. And also there you have the sovereign rights. Sovereign rights is very important. They are very important for countries because of economic, and survivability. So some countries have to do certain things that they have to do because the country depends on this commercial or economic sources for the country to sustain itself. So when we're looking at sovereign rights and sovereignty, we're looking actually at a very long game. How many minutes do I have? I've gone off? No? It's okay, moderator, Professor Adam. Can I have 2 more?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Dr. Adina, please go.
Yes, thank you. What do I have? Now it's done for me. When we look at the claimant state, okay, I'm done on this. Can we go to the next slide? So this itself is how Malaysia has approached it. A lot of countries sometimes they meet us and they say, no, you have to say more, you have to say things more, be loud and all that. Sometimes it all depends. Not every country needs to project itself. So, you know, when you're talking about strategy here, you're talking about strategy. On position, we've always been very verbal. On our position, we have always been outspoken. And this is where we say, and you can compare it, you know, you have academicians here, you can study, you can see how Malaysia is consistent. Some countries, you have a different position to it, and I'm not going to comment on that. But for Malaysia, if you look at it, the position has always been constant. We are always against self-restraint, and we are always making sure that we always push this agenda forward. Why? Because we don't want escalation on the ground. As Professor Taya had also mentioned, the Sino-Vietnamese escalation, the PAA in 1995 between Navy of Philippines and all that. So if we say that what we're pushing is security, stability, peaceful, then we have to ensure that the other end of the spectrum is always an act of self-restraint. Because if you act, I think, it's just a being triggered or shooting from the hips, then it will not be something which is positive to the situation. And we don't want, when we talk about non-escalation, as my fellow panelists had also mentioned, the unintended incidents and incidental incidents. And this is very, very important. And we say this to everybody. It's not just those coming to our waters, but also we don't, for example, agree on the way sometimes there's a crossbow action. For example, in 2018, Liu Yang and the destroyer, it was about 100 meters, 150 meters, and I don't know, I'm sure naval officers are in this. And this is what we understand. 150 meters is not like you're parking your car in the car park. You can, we're talking about water, we're talking about waves. So 150 meters is something that could escalate, if it happened, could escalate into something further. And then ours is also on the rule of law, why we look at this, and UNCLOS is also very important. That's why under UNCLOS, settlement of disputes it includes the negotiation, mediation, and a lot of things of reaching out to each other. And also it includes third-party adjudication as well. So it depends. Some countries will freely, some countries will say that they have exhausted and they should go, and it's totally the right of the countries to do it. And then we have the management of issue through peaceful negotiation and consultation. Again, this is related to the rule of law, and it's also under UNCLOS. We look at the United Nations Charter. We look at, issue of threat or the threat of force or threat or use of force, and it goes back right up to the peace, security, stability. So if you say something, then you better walk the talk. So when we feel that there's peace, security, and stability, that means there will contribute to the regional stability. And maybe somebody will say, oh, this all sounds rosy and all, but it's not. It is not easy to do this, especially those you see in blue, self-restraint and non-escalation. And sometimes in situation, I think there was a mention of West Capella. Yes, it was not something that was easy to do. We had so many coming also into our parties, can be helpful, cannot be helpful, but ensuring that the situation on the ground remained peaceful, secure, and stable. So it was it was such a challenge to manage the dispute and conflict in that area. So it's easy to talk about peace, security, and stability. It's easy to say non-escalation. But when the situation presents itself on the ground, it's a whole totally different story. So that's why, you know, I welcome some of the points that my learned colleagues have mentioned. Can we go? We have another two. Sorry. Okay, some action taken. So I don't want to say that these are the things, but what I was saying earlier, in taking a decisive action to something unthinkable, it's not something that you would pluck from the air. And sometimes some of the things that you see are not spoken, doesn't mean it's not done. So there's so many things. Like I mentioned, it's a long game. Sovereignty, sovereign rights, it's totally a long game. So some of the I think if you had to look at it, some of the things Malaysia have done, in addition to some of what our enforcement, our naval officers, even our Air Force, they've done in their part of the equation. But it's also something that we use the law to take some decisive action. For example, we believe under Article 76 and 77 of the United Nations Law of the Sea, there are rights of parties to claim the submission of extended continental shelf. And we've done this with our neighbor, Vietnam, in 2009. Of course, there are also issues of rules of procedures that says that if there is a protest from another party, it will be deferred, the consideration. Fine, but there is already a claim, there's interest that we have staked, and it's not to add to the situation on the ground. It's basically depending on the law itself, 76, 77, right of state parties to claim what is, or to push its interest of what could be our extended continental shelf. And it's up to the CLCS to look at it as geographical and technical consideration. It's not a maritime delimitation process. And again, we've done it in Malaysian Partial Submission 2019. So are we saying that we don't have the decisive action? You know, years are spent by technical experts to do certain submission. And these are some of the things that we can see from our claim of the features in 1970s, from the occupation of the features, from the negotiation of DOC and now in COC, and the things that we are also doing, okay? Then we have related activities. I think you can see that some of the things are ongoing on the ground. So there are some things that we, of course, claim what is ours. And then there's also utilization of resources. For example, we say that contentious issue of Beting Ali, but we have utilized our own resources in making sure that there's research, there's also fishing, and there's also, most importantly, surveillance in that area. So if you look at the way we have done, we have continuously protest on this. And it's important. A lot of things we say, so you protest, and so what happened? It doesn't work that way. It must be protested. It must be documented, as my learned colleague can say. And these are all part of the communication between countries, so as not to have the end results as acquiescent of sovereignty and sovereign rights being taken away from you. So basically, there have some strategies that have been done because we follow the law. Again, we follow the rule of law, 1982 UNCLOS. We can submit on our submission. Okay, have a look. So, okay, so what we essentially is looking at is a whole conflict and dispute situation. So when I say this, I must say for Malaysia that our position is that we don't have dispute with some excessive claims in the country, for example, right? So because according to 1982 UNCLOS, some of the claims may not be even reaching in our area. But again, there are countries that will claim. So it's all about what is yours, what is mine, and all that. So you're looking at conflict management. So when we look again in trying to see what decisive action can be taken, what unthinkable or thinkable, you have to look at this. You can't say that there is always a nuclear option to go. I think you listened to the welcoming remarks earlier by the Chief of Defence Force. I think, in fact, he actually summed up some of the things that we're supposed to discuss today. Diplomacy, the way to go, going on to support the rule of law. So when you look at conflict management, you know there's two issues. Again, like I say, territorial and maritime claims. These are not going to be resolved anytime soon. Some of the claims are really assertive, and some of the claims are from different sources. Some you claim from archipelagos, and then certain things you claim from actual continent, and then there are claims that actual continent, but it goes out, and so difficult to to see the overlapping claim. So what we have is, how do we manage the situation on the ground? This is, again, it goes back to diplomacy and thinking ahead. It's never about us thinking like, hey, they will not do this to us. Come on, this is Malaysia. It's never that. Because in such a situation, we have to know some of the things that we're taking. It's never about just taking chances without decisive action. And then we worry about the unthinkable later. It's never that. It's if you see some of the things, which sometimes I cannot share here, are all strategic thinking as well. And then you look at, after that's just management of the issues, we also related to DOC and related to the CBM that I've mentioned about. Then you look at conflict prevention. So some of the things that we want to prevent conflict in the area, for example, mitigate the action on the ground. I think earlier, a few years ago, they have done queues, that means between navy to navy, and then on communication, and then we also have now the COC. So COC is so interesting. We didn't have, we had a lot of step-by-step resumption last year in order not to remain idle on the COC itself. So we had to look at a few things, for example, and now after the 7th of July meeting, 19th some doc, which was brought up to the special ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Chongqing last month. We have now resumed textual negotiations. Sometimes we put a stop then, or for a while, to the actual textual negotiation because of the confidentiality issue, and because sometimes in negotiation it's quite a challenge to negotiate this way. Like, for example, now I don't even see some of your faces, and sometimes the dynamics of negotiation can only be done through physical meetings. So while we have the idea of physical meetings, still the perfect modality, but for us, we also have to continue when the pandemic is also uncertain. So certain things that we're doing, we're looking at certain paragraphs, and in fact, today I have the negotiation. Then I may have to leave earlier. So basically that. And now we look at conflict transformation. Why is this important? Because now we are managing and preventing, but the end game, which is a long game, is how this conflict can be transformed. We look when in order for you to understand how it can be transformed, do you look at it a realist view or a constructive view? And the constructive view is always the way that is the most trying. It's the realist view would be something what's happening on the ground, that's how we react, and it's what we do. But is there a situation of violent conflict now? Because conflict transformation means that we have to work with non-state actors and everything. So although there's no situation of actual violent conflict, doesn't mean that countries cannot look at the way transformation can be done. And some of the transformation may include some of the most difficult things that we will, countries have to face itself. So again, I would like to just look at and pick the words back of the Chief of Defence Forces, which I believe so is a long-lasting and sustainable outcome of this. And it's easier said than done, but rest assured, for now, the prevention, the management, and slowly moving conflict transformation, these are some of the things that we're doing with decisive action. So on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adina, for some important thought-provoking insights. I'm sure your points will lead to an interesting discussion shortly We have taken note that you have to leave shortly after this webinar. So I will open up to the participants to ask questions. But before that, I need to mention some house rules. Please, if you want to ask your question, please do raise your hand. You can also type your questions in the Q&A chat box. We can see there are lots of questions coming in. Some have been answered directly by the speakers themselves. So I will not put these questions live again. Some of the questions that you did ask but has been answered by the speakers as the talks were going on. But please keep your questions short and concise due to time limits. We have about 1 hour for Q&A. You are allowed to ask one question at a time. So, and also please state your name and organization. And again, I need to repeat, as Dr. Adina also mentioned earlier on when she started, we are following Chatham House rules, where there's no attribution to the points or statements made. All right, let's open up and let's take the first question. Since Dr. Adina has to leave early, perhaps a question or two for her. There's a question earlier on. I think Dr. Adina, you did mention about Beting Patinggi Ali. Just now, Malaysia has been launching some protests and, of course, putting it on record. So again, that question reflects in a sense that what is Malaysia's government's view about that? And of course, how effective so far what the Malaysian government has taken in relation to the Beting Patinggi Ali thus far. So that was one question. So perhaps Dr. Adina, you can elaborate further. You did mention that, I noticed, but perhaps you can elaborate a little bit further about Beting Patinggi issue. And of course, there's also a question related recently. There was a Chinese overflight of 16 PLAA aircraft. There's another question related to that. Again, near Beting Patinggi or South Luconia shows. Again, what is your view in relation to that? Yeah, Dr. Adina?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can answer now. Sorry. But
yes, please, Dr. Adina. Yes, please.
Sorry. Okay, so I saw another person's picture, very familiar before this being flashed. But okay, when we're talking about Beting Patinggi Ali, why it has become such an important issue is because you look at it as where you see an archipelagic group of islands, of features. And this is, of course, very important. So when you look at the DOC itself, you're not supposed to occupy or inhabit unoccupied features. But these occupied features is also in our waters. And when we signed the DOC and the COC, after the 1979, you had a look where countries all move, and in the region, I mean, there was a race to the features in the South China Sea. So how countries, strengthened their claims in South China Sea. And that's why we had the 1996, people were talking about the need, I think countries and region talking about the need to have a code of conduct. And that's when we started the declaration on the code of conduct negotiation. It didn't reach to the point where we want it to be, which is code, right? So it became a declaration. So in some parts of this declaration mentioned that we're not supposed to occupy new features, for example. But it's difficult to put a stop because we have our 1979 map. So of course that will be something of our concern, and it's maybe about 85 kilometers or nautical miles away from our shore. So of course what we have now in that area, we don't really occupy it, but we don't really want to see another presence as well, because it's what we consider our water. So when there is this presence, this is where I'm saying where is the interest lies, yeah? And then of course the geographical configuration of that shows as well. There were reports that say that before this, it was submerged, and then now the things are being emerge. So does that again qualify under something which is Article 1 or rock? So these are some of the issues that we have in when countries try to make their claim, because under UNCLOS, law of the sea as well, there's this regime of islands which is very important. Professor Carl Thayer, remember, I think in 2011 or 2012, we had this platform or discussion. I think it was organized by MIMA, and then we had this discussion at the Royal Chulan Hotel. So we mentioned when this regime of island, it was, I think Professor Robert Beckman was also there. It was like, it was a teaser, or it was a joke among us that says that when it's ours, it's an island, when it's yours, it's a rock. I don't know whether you remember this, Professor Taylor, but these are the importance of the regime of islands and how countries try to see if submerge or emerge. That's one thing. But the most important thing to the question today is what we're doing. I have mentioned that we have also done our research, scientific research in this area as a country or sovereign will be allowed to do. We also send our fishermen, and we also do monitoring. So again, we will send our protest note, and this has been asked so many times, for example, in the parliament, and it's something that we will continue to do. Whether, you know, I said it's a long game. It doesn't mean that we send 100 today, things will stop in that area, but we have to continue to send, because that is how I think you push for the rights of sovereign. Thank you. On the issue, Prof, earlier you mentioned about Chinese flight or something?
Yes, Dr. Adina, I think that's the question about China's People's Liberation Army Air Force. Just about a few weeks ago, 16 of the aircraft flew near South Luconia shows. Again, what is Malaysia's response, and what should Malaysia do, especially in the future, if these incursions continue to increase and so on.
Well, of course, most importantly, we always look for, you know, open channel of communication. When you have open channel of communication, that would be something that can actually help to mitigate situation on the ground. But in this case, this has already happened. So I'm just going to concentrate on what had happened and say it so, because on our, you know, verbal protest, sorry, on our protest, for example, which we have protested, it's, I guess, when you look at the posturing that we have by our TUDM, the TUDM is part of the armed forces that will, of course, need to always protect the country and its sovereignty. A lot of people say that, hey, it's quite far from the actual land base where there's actual situations of sovereignty or 12 nautical miles going forward. But I think if you look at an agency which is stands on the protection of the sovereignty and the security of the Malaysian of a country, then you would understand where they're coming from, because it has been reported there was been a tactical mission approach, the maneuvering. So if I or anyone standing on guard looking at a certain formation, you know, ask the questions or you know, raise the issue of security, then it's something that is how our TUDM had reacted to. And that's what we're protecting. Again, it's not against the flight or freedom of flight and overflight, but it's what the formation looked like then. And it will also trigger the country's armed forces or the Air Force to ensure that the protection of, you know, for the country, it's undertaken. Thank you. I see a gentleman, which actually, yes. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Dr. Adina. Again, I'm very sorry, Mr. Harisa and Professor Taylor, because Dr. Adina is leaving very soon. So I would like to direct another question to her before we move on to other questions within your area. All right, can I take one more question from the course members? I can see their faces on the screen. Okay.
Is it?
No. Okay. There's another question from the Q&A regarding the continental shelf submission by Malaysia. It was opposed by Vietnam and Philippines. So the question is that, yeah, how would there what kind of impact would that have on Malaysia's submission on the continental shelf in relation to UNCLOS? And according to Professor Taylor has answered briefly that question, perhaps Dr. Adina, you can elaborate further from your perspective. How does that work? Because this is reading your what you have been in your negotiations for in terms of boundary issues.
Okay, thank you again, Prof. So, we have submitted two separate submissions. So actually, it was not protested by Vietnam and Philippines, but it was protested by China and Philippines. Okay, so for China, again, I think the claim comes from the 9-dash line or the 4-shark claim that they have in that area. So which they say is that overlap with us, and that's why they protested on that basis. For Philippines, I think the basis was from their claims to Sabah. So we have that. And then what started from that decisive action is a whole lot of argument and shooting of third-person note, with their thoughts, and it includes, I think, Japan, Australia, America, Indonesia, and Vietnam, of course. So for us, what we have to do as a state party is to put in our interest, register what can be accorded to us under the 1982 UNCLOS. As I mentioned earlier, this is not a delimitation process. So countries should not be alarmed with the fact that it's a Malaysia trying to get everything and it's a delimitation without their approval. It's based on scientific and geographical qualities of the area that we are asking. That means from 200 nautical miles to 350 nautical miles at the foot of the slope. This is also very geographical and technical for me. But under 76 and 77, a state has the right to ask for such submission to be considered by the Commission on the legal limits of the continental shelf. And this itself is, I think, what we firmly believe is the practice of the rule of law itself under 1982, what we can ask. But of course, there are also challenges to certain acts of submission, because when a country, under the rules of procedure of the Commission of the limits of a continental shelf, when there is protest, for example, it will be deferred. But it doesn't matter, because it should, at one point, I think, people are also looking at the rules of procedures. There have also been debates on whether this can be looked into. But the most important thing is that as a country, state parties, we have a certain issue that we want to bring forward under the rule of law 1982 UNCLOS, and we register this is our area. So we have joint submission in 2009 with Vietnam, and 10 years later, we have it on our own on the partial submission on the remaining portion of the continental shelf. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adina. All right, let's move on to next question. Course members of NRC, do you want to ask any questions?
Prof. Adam, this is First Admiral Dr. Najahan. I think
yes,
6 of us already raised our hand. I think we should start with the first one, maybe General Wahab first, because we have 6 course members. You can see the name? Cannot.
Assalamualaikum and very good morning, Professor Adam Leong and all the panelists. Thank you for sharing your insight of the topic this morning. I am Brigadier General Abdul Wahab from the Army. My question is that how best in your view that we can stand firm of our claim versus the mighty muzzle flight by the more powerful nation who have been defying world court findings all this while. Thank you.
I give this.
Thank you very much, General.
I give to Professor Dea.
Yes, perhaps Professor Taylor, you may want to answer this question.
Right, I think we have to be very careful here. China's making these ambit claims, but it's not really using its military force. It's using what some analysts call gray zone operations. They're using a Coast Guard, maritime militia, and fishing boats. And the other day I was on a webinar with a former head of intelligence and Pacific Command, retired naval captain of great experience. And his bottom line was that China and Xi Jinping in particular are pretty risk adverse when it comes to provoking military to military confrontation because they don't know where it's going to go. And that would even affect Malaysia. Okay, now back on my track. So all Malaysia has to do, and I'm talking asymmetric, is deal with the gray zone operations. You cannot meet Coast Guard to Coast Guard because all of China's Coast Guard is larger than the entire Coast Guards of Southeast Asia plus Japan. And if you put them in tonnages, Southeast Asian Coast Guards don't approach the 5,000 and 10,000 ton category that China has, let alone the armament. So it's got to be, I'm talking piecemeal encounters. So as long as China is making these claims, my response was, you push back and challenge the narrative, keep making the protests. But to prevent, again, harassment of Petronas, and already as we speak, we know there's another harassment operation underway. My strategy was either alone or hopefully you could build up trust to operate with friendly countries, specifically from time to time. So it's not a permanent presence, but it's there to preposition your maritime law enforcement and your naval assets with friendly countries, if possible, in the area where the oil exploration is going to occur, to be able to block China, put the onus on it. And then you are entitled under law to certain ways of self-defense and proportionate use of force if China starts ramming or even fire shots to warn off. Now, I think we're pushing it too far because if you're publicizing this in real time, if you're building up international support from the international community, a certain restraint will be used, I think, against China. But I'm saying there's no, one operation isn't going to solve the problem. It has to be very carefully timed, and it's got to be done with others. And so it's not, no one's, even the United States would have a hard time, as the former commander-in-chief, commander of Indo-Pacific Command, Philip Davidson said, to do a direct challenge. And America's changing its kind of posture. But these are fluid times. So for me, where Malaysia's been the quiet one, if you're talking of decisive action, the decisive action is for Malaysia to begin to take a whole of government approach to begin to assert ways of protecting its sovereign jurisdiction before the matter gets worse. And finally, on oil exploration, since I was leaked a copy of the single draft negotiating text, you have China saying all oil exploration activities should be done between China and the national companies in the region, and no companies should be hired from outside the region. The Malaysian submission, basically, it's not in opposition, it was submitted at the same time, says Malaysia, sovereign country, reserves the right to contract whomever it wants to exploit its resources. And that's where Malaysia should follow through, but it needs to protect them. And sending a frigate for a day and then having it disappear, I think is, you know, has happened in the past, is not the answer. To me, it's to occupy that space ahead of time, to make China have to rethink how it's going to intrude and rethink its gray zone tactics.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Taylor. I can see a list of the hands. I will just follow down the list because I cannot see who raised first. So the next up is Brigadier General Datuk Haji Ismail. If, please, you may ask your question. Thank you, sir. Sir,
Jangan dah buka ni.
I cannot hear you, sir.
Dah buka ni. Jangan. Dr. Adam, you also muted.
I cannot hear you, sir. Can you hear me? Can you hear Datuk Ismail's question?
Cannot.
General Ismail, we cannot hear you.
Cannot hear.
Datuk Ismail, cannot hear you.
Can you unmute your mic, sir?
Cannot. Prof, maybe we can take other questions first because
Yeah, Dato', we can't hear you. I think there's some technical problem. All right, next move to the next hand raise. General Malik.
okay. Thank you, Prof. Good morning, panelists. This is for Dr. Carlisle Thayer. Reference the January this year, Malaysia and Australia has launched the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership platform, the CSP. So given the strategic context of ASEAN, the South Asian today, the CSP defense cooperation has high potential spin-off for Australia and Malaysia. So how do you see Australia can play its role on resolving the South China Sea issues and challenges, especially through ASEAN way, which is more likened and preferred by China, while Australia is hooked with Quad. And the other one is in line with your strategic preemption, what do you think of ASEAN military force? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General. Professor Thayer.
Right, well, General, I would point out that the Quad has met once in a virtual summit. And among its outcomes were 3 working groups, none of which were directed at maritime security. And I gave a paper recently because there have been no joint statements other than 3 foreign ministers very recently, but 7 senior officials meeting. And I looked through that, and yes, maritime security was ranged, but it's never percolated through all 7 to become a formalized objective or goal. It's COVID relief, it's dealing with climate change, it's dealing with disruptive technologies. So I wouldn't be too aggressive about the Quad just yet. What it can do is bring about among the 4 Quad members, all ASEAN dialogue partners, all members of the East Asia Summit, a coordination of their national capabilities to deal with non-traditional security issues. That's the best thing they can do. And even providing counter offers of infrastructure to China's Belt and Road. They're not putting a gun to anybody's head and forcing them to take the money. They're just offering alternatives. So I don't think we should get too alarmist about the Quad. The Quad itself has repeatedly said it backs ASEAN centrality and it takes notes and supports ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. It's clear from the ASEAN outlook it is in a central position and it will not side with China or the United States. Now, having said that, the ASEAN way has resulted in China's militarization of the South China Sea and is the most disruptive change there, because all talk and division inside ASEAN, the use of consensus decision-making rather than qualified majority to allow Cambodia to subvert the process. And I know I was leaked the transcript of the 2012 retreat, and I know exactly what was said there. So we have to be, the ASEAN has to look at itself and create a community building issue. Now, I can't go further because Myanmar's challenging all that and is going to take the oxygen out of attempts to deal with the South China Sea issue as we speak. I mean, that's just a truism itself. Now, between Australia, which is a five-power defense member, all partner of Malaysia itself, you know, we're long, but I'm saying it's just limited to the area defense of Peninsula Malaysia. And some high end, because of your defense minister in the late 80s with FPDA revitalizing it, has got, you know, some high end activities and operations that are going. To me, now is the time to rethink. And the rethinking, can the FPDA change? In Australia's case, we're not the United States. So it's easier for some countries like Vietnam to deal with us in a way that going to the United States seems to be aligning against China. Now, meanwhile, we're called the cat's paw by China because we're the bad boys right now in their books, as I was getting at. But anything that helps build up. But when you look at your force posture, 2 submarines, a couple frigates, what do you bring to the table? When I was talking of your force posture and long-term planning, there's some talk of starting up little combat ships. You have to look at creating a military that has the structure and the capability to meet the strategy, ends, ways, and means. And my ends where I gave you all the problem, and the end is to stop all these violations of your sovereign jurisdiction, to stop squatting at Laconia Shoal, to stop harassing Petronas. That's your objectives of that strategy. Military is one component, and part of that component, ends, ways, and means, though, is to be able to have, and you don't yet have it, that's why it's a long-term game. So it's, can you convince Australia, we don't have a Coast Guard, for its Navy, either on its own or in cooperation with yours or some other friendly country, to do that? My suggestion was preempt by showing up around, we're friendly, we're not going to land on your oil and take them away, and occupy that space before China arrives. Now, in our case, China has, not only does China have to wonder what happens if they get tough, but you get tough with Australia. We are an ally of the United States. So China has to think about that. And I'm saying the thinking of, at least of this one naval officer that I referred to, Xi Jinping is too cautious yet to use the military wedge. So we now have to deal with China Coast Guard, China militia, and fishing fleets. And so we need a strategy to counter that. None of us can, it's the largest Coast Guard in the world. So we have to pick our fights tactically. Look at their rotational patterns, decide what's the weakness in them, decide what happened. One, I would, confidence, get the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia all to do something at the same time. Can China then stop oil exploration in the Philippines, Vietnam, and Petronas's illegal activities? I mean, we have to be imaginative. That's why I talked about coordination. I was hinting at tactics like that. So my approach is you don't want to confront China directly. You don't want to force it where the onus is on you to use force, but you're allowed legitimate force. If you're going to arrest civilian boats and they start shooting at a Malaysian law enforcement vessel, you have the right to defend yourself. Okay, so, that's why you video it, you document it, and you make your case as it occurs. So otherwise I'll just be repeating long-term strategy, but that's why I'm saying it's not business as usual. The person in charge has got to then, on each incident, ramp up the information warfare, ramp up or tone down each of the elements that I was talking about to suit the particular confrontation. Beam in the world's press and have it on everybody's screens all over the world in places that count, have journalists writing about it all over the place. And to quote from a Chatham House presentation here by one of the world's leading experts, if you're going to have to take on China, join a gang. Make sure you have other people supporting you. Don't do it alone. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Professor Thayer. Perhaps Dr. Simail, are you back online? Can we take your question? All right, good. We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. I have a question to address to Professor Thayer with regard the court, right? You have mentioned in your presentation just now the ASEAN linkage, ASEAN and court linkage. So we really understand the principal objective outlined for the court. So among of the objective is maritime security, but somehow or other, since Quad is not an alliance, neither having any collective security obligation, but a more form of geopolitical assurance per se. And furthermore, it is only a diplomatic network that provides a vehicle for strategic exchange and positive practical cooperation. My question is, how best Quad should play its role in accordance its outline objective to face the challenges as you had mentioned just now to ensure the peace and stability in this region. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Dato'. Professor Taylor.
Right. You're right. The Quad isn't an alliance. It's a security dialogue. But it's going to now become a formalized part of the architecture. If you go back to 2007 or you move up to 2017, as I say, 7 meetings of their senior officials, 3 meetings of their foreign ministers, and the first virtual summit, and now in October, the first face-to-face summit. So it's going to become a part of the regional architecture. And the fact that it's part of the regional architecture does not mean it has to be a military alliance. And it's not just a diplomatic network once it takes this institutional form. And we have to see where that's going. So I'm anticipating that particular development. Then so far, I say, looking at the agenda of all these items used in the language, finally the word inclusive got put in there, and you wonder, that's India, make the membership, etc. It's taking the non-traditional climate, COVID and recovery, climate change, I say emerging technologies. What I was suggesting is that when you had the financial crisis and China didn't devalue, you ended up forming an ASEAN +3, China, Japan, South Korea, plus ASEAN itself. In all the discussions I go with my American friends, it's grab Vietnam and make them a member of the Quad. They're going to do it. That singles Vietnam out and it won't join. If you go to Malaysia, the same thing's going to happen because it makes you allied against China. So a way to alleviate that, in my view, as a diplomatic strategy, is to have ASEAN, which has a charter. And because of that, it can meet with other security agencies, which it's done in its history. And it could meet with the Quad. Now that can take place. You could have an East Asia summit, you have leaders retreat. You could have after that a separate meeting called ASEAN +4, where the 4 members of the Quad then meet with ASEAN to begin to discuss how they can reinforce the ASEAN positions. But other than that, yes, the Quad can do things outside of ASEAN's region. So you're maintaining, outside's purview. You try to maintain ASEAN's centrality, but ASEAN cannot protect freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. So that's going to be left to the Quad members to do. And instead of seeing the Quad as an alliance, my view is you're going to see, depending on circumstances and geography, 3 members or 2 members working, but also with others. Australia is going to work with France, increasingly. Australia can work with Japan, it works South Pacific. So that's the pattern. So, but alone, your question was, how can they ensure peace and stability? It takes 2 to do that, and the other actor is China. They can try to, America wants to build a credible conventional deterrence, that's yet to be seen. The Quad has yet to even move into that direction firmly. That could be on the process. But on the other hand, that China has to begin to calculate, these are the consequences of its current behavior. And it seems to be creating a coalition of countries not well organized that want to push back. At least the Quad can give some leadership to that, but it's a work in progress.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Taylor. There's a question here by Admiral Yosne. So I would like to direct this question to Mr. Hariza. The question is, we know that China has become more aggressive and assertive day to day. Should we opt for coercive action in concurring with our diplomatic process? So Mr. Hariza, if...
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. I think, first of all, when we talk about China being more aggressive, it really depends on how we look at things. right? Because what it means to be more aggressive is really, to understand what impact that actually brings to us. That would actually help us think about the strategy of how we want to react to it, right? So in my experience of dealing with, disputed sort of like territories, aggressiveness can also be a strategy. Doesn't necessarily mean that it is, pure real aggressiveness in the sense of the word in itself. Now, I think it's very important for Malaysia to understand that strategy and to place ourselves on how to counter that strategy. Obviously, Professor Teh has stated in many ways, and can't be more succinct than that no country can take on China alone. And Malaysia, the list of countries, that possibility is almost, zero, right? So we need to think about how we place ourselves, within a bigger context, how we break the issue down to look at, specific issues and to try and counter that aggressiveness on that specific issues using other platforms that is available. Right? So, we have spoken about how we can work within the ASEAN context. We have spoken of how we can bring other parties together. We have tried, several different methods actually around the Sulu Seas, for instance, on how we can jointly develop a certain area or even protect a certain area with our neighbors. We should use all these different, options that is available. But there's no one answer. Because when you talk about aggressiveness, it depends, right? Aggressiveness towards, Petronas operations, or aggressiveness towards, certain claims or maps, or aggressiveness towards, a statement. Those are all very different things, and it requires a different strategy, I think. Thank you.
Excuse me, Prof. Adam.
Yes, Dr. Adina, please, you may want to add on to that.
Yes,
Actually,
I have a few minutes before my coordination prep for negotiation today. I'm just going to take a leave in 1 or 2 minutes. But can I just add to a question number 2, which I didn't get to answer, was the CLCS. And then I'll just do a nutshell of what I have spoken. Is that okay? Or unless there's another question, but I think it's quite okay.
Yes, please, Doctor.
Okay, so basically earlier I mentioned there was a question on the CLCS, and I've spoken on the side of what China protested about. But for Philippines, as you know, it's from the Sabah claims, which is dormant. Sometimes it comes up again, and then there's no more, and then it comes up again. So in 2009, the protest from Philippines was against our submission to the continental shelf, basically from the Sabah issue, also in 2019. But I think we have to look at the decision. It's difficult for some countries sometimes to accept different decisions, but our stand is clear that Sabah people have chosen under the Cobalt Commission. And so we're talking about self-determination here under international law. So, and that's why we will continue to claim what we have, and our stand on our 1979 map, for example, is projected from Sabah. And so this is where we stand on that. I'd like to just come back on my nutshell. One, I'd like to just submit my points again to the audience. First, South China Sea is not just one country against another, or one country against many. It's many countries against each other as well. I think I've shown you in the map. It's multi-parties, multi-stakeholders. We have something overlapping with Vietnam. We have something overlapping, the claims are overlapping. Philippines, for example, we have settled to a certain point with Brunei. But again, we have to look at, when we say decisive action, who are we talking about? Which area are we talking about? And it's not the whole South China Sea that for Malaysia that we're claiming. There's some areas between China and Vietnam, for example. And that's why I think when Professor Teh mentioned about this bilateral, because they have the issue of Gulf of Tonkin, so they will take something which is very particular to them. And so with other countries as well. So for Malaysia, our stand is such. There are many multi-party stakeholders, and then I think on the terms of what our armed forces are doing, I think it's a whole government approach is very important. Our men are also doing, our men at sea, our men at land, our men on air are all doing what they have to do, and if that could be improved further, that would be of course better. Then there's also the decisive actions that we have taken. Sometimes it's not seen as such by some, but in Malay we have this saying, apa yang tersurat is not apa yang tersirat. It's sometimes you don't see it for it is, and sometimes speaking about something doesn't mean a different thing, and not speaking about something are also part of the strategy. I also like to touch on the diplomacy and defense, that of course very important, because we don't want a situation of a nuclear option. There's always this diplomacy and of course defense. You can't just go on the traction of diplomacy and forget your defense. These are all very important for us. So all the men in the armed forces are very important for us, in the uniform, law enforcement, policing, and everything. It's not a fragmented approach. So again, it's something that I would support on, whole of a government approach. I like also to say about sometimes when we have certain issues, we may see one country doing fishing militia, but I think we should also look at sometimes there can be a new form of fishing militia, for example, from our neighbors. So these are also important for us, because our men at sea again have to enforce the law, protect our resources or non-resources, and protect the rights of the fishermen. And the area sometimes is so difficult, and it's not where some of our fishermen with smaller or reduced capabilities of boats tend to go further at sea. So we have situation where among our neighbors as well, we have this issue in the South China Sea. I like to say that we always believe in the peaceful settlement of dispute, and peaceful resolution should be in accordance with universally recognized principles of international, including UNCLOS. I like to end with two things. On the 29th of July, I saw in the South China Morning Post about an article where they say the Philippines, I think they utilize the voice of ladies when they have challenges at sea with China. So if you want to look, it's South China Morning Post, 29th of July. And it says that apparently they look at it as a matriarchal approach to things, and that maybe when between challenges between ships, when they hear from ladies, is something else, and then it will de-escalate the situation. I'm not sure about the motivation for that for Philippines, but I think for our Malaysian Navy, they have been using ladies' voice, and it's not because of feminist view, it's because basically the participation of women in navies as well. So we've done that before. Lastly, I'd like to thank you for your moderation. You're very calm. You make me very calm after all the coffees that I've drank today. Thank you to my learned panelists. So enjoyable to hear from you, Professor Kalte, Mr. Harizal. I also like to thank, of course, the NRC for inviting me. It's an honor, a privilege to be here among the strategists that we have in our offices. Lastly, I can see actually BMW is part of the sponsor. I'm not sure, I saw it there. Okay, I'll say a thumbs up for BMW because I brought back one from Germany and it's the ultimate driving machine. So on that note, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adina. We really certainly appreciate your kind remarks and your talks, sharing your talks with us. So thank you very much, everyone. Dr. Adina will be leaving us shortly because she has other more important functions to attend to. Thank you so much, Dr. Adina. Have a nice day.
Okay, Prof, it's not there's another important function. This is also very important. I'm so excited. Just that we have a preparation meeting for the 2 o'clock ASEAN meeting. Thank you, Prof, again. Hope to work again. Thank you very much, Prof.
Most welcome. Thank you very much, Dr. Adina. So, all right, let's continue on with our question and answer session. I see hands raised up. Colonel Cairo, you're next.
Assalamualaikum and very good morning. Can you hear me, Prof?
Yes, I can hear you, Colonel.
Okay, thank you to the panelists. My question is for Mr. Harizal. Mr. Harizal, you did suggest for Malaysia to abandon its non-alignment policy, or should we call it non-alignment ideology? But you did not discuss precisely on how do we go about of doing that? We cannot just wake up one day and decide to take a jump. So what would be the conditions that we must achieve first as a nation before we can say that, yes, we are ready to make that jump? The shift from non-alignment policy to being aligned to certain power is a huge strategic decision. So my question is, what would be the indicators, the criteria or conditions that needs to be achieved that tells us, yes, it is the right time to shift? Conditions such as in terms of politics, diplomatic, economic, military. What are your suggestions? I'm excited to listen to your response. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Khairul.
Sorry, can I answer now?
Yes, please, Mr.
Okay.
Harizal.
Thank you very much, Khairul. I think that's an excellent question. First of all, let me qualify. I did not say that we should abandon our non-alignment policy. What I said was that non-alignment had become an ideology, and that's problematic, right? Now, the reality is it doesn't really exist, and we know that. And you are someone who operates in the field. There's no such thing as non-alignment. At the end of the day, we have to decide, to make our best decision and to align to certain parties or certain countries or certain issues, depending on the situation. Now, what I'm really concerned about is that if we have no stand, and if we take it as a whole, and Malaysia, we feel that we can be comfortable and say that we are always being non-aligned to certain things, we don't really exist within the reality of the context of international politics and international diplomacy, right? The worry is more internal than external. And I did qualify in my presentation to say that we should continue to be a member of non-aligned movement. We should continue to suggest that countries should be able to make claims on their own and to defend their own territory. Countries should not be sandwiched between two major superpowers, for instance, China and the US. But at the same time, what worries me is that if we truly think that as an ideology, then it limits our thinking. There will be a point that we have to make a stand, and we have to be at a position where we need to align ourselves to certain powers or certain countries. Like Professor Thayer aptly mentioned, we cannot take on China on our own. If it comes to a point, right, and this is the exercise of the thinking, right, comes to a point, then how do we align ourselves with other parties? Now, we can't think about that if from the beginning we have to turn that into an ideology and think that we exist solely or independently, in the international politics. So that's my point. So it's not really coming up to a situation where we feel we are strong enough and we can seriously, be, and that's precisely against the idea. But the thinking is that non-alignment should not limit the possibilities and should not basically limit our thinking in terms of strategy of where should we place ourselves if we need to when the time comes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harizal. Khairul, does that answer your question?
Yeah,
right.
Excellent one from Mr. Harizal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, coming up next, Admiral Baharudin.
Thank you, Prof.
Welcome. Thank you.
Panelists, I'm First Admiral Baharudin from the Royal Malaysian Navy. My question to you is that I think it's quite clear that our response with regard to the situation in the South China Sea is rather, how should I say, passive and at times reactive, mostly not to escalate things, as for the reason described by Dr. Adrina. And I think some of which include the asymmetry of resource and forces by claimants such as Malaysia against China. But one of the things I think is less discussed variables is the dependency or reliability of United States long-term commitment to this region. As you rightly discussed earlier, that whatever claimant states need to do, that need to be done in concert with our friends and allies. And obviously the most important one of those will be the United States. So this commitment have come into question. As I said, it was okay up until the Obama presidency, and then we have President Trump. So where ASEAN, let alone Malaysia, is no longer probably is not even in their radar at that time. So going forward, can we, Malaysia, depends on United States commitment to help us out in responding to this situation, if we ever to decide on probably increasing or escalating our response to the claim by China. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Can I take that maybe first?
Yes, please, Mr. Harisa.
Be very short. Yeah, first of all, I'm not an American, so I really can't talk about Americans' commitment. So I'll probably be looking at this from or as an outsider. I think the tricky bit from your question is that there's two parts to it, right? The first part is really the commitment bit, right? And then the second part is how then is it dependable? Can we depend on that? What if the commitment changes, right? Now, I think on the commitment side, commitment really depends on leadership and strategic sort of like calculations, so on and so forth. Now, it will be naive for us to think that these things are basically moving at the same inertia, right? Things changes. But I think in the long run, the United States of America will continue to maintain a certain level of, interest around this issue. Now, having said that, we have to understand that the United States of America is not one of the claimants of the South China Sea, right? They actually, they're not part of it. Quite frankly, one day they can just pack up and say, look, whatever, right? We want to think about other things. I'm not saying that might happen strategically. I don't think that's, it's naive to think that might happen. But hey, that's the reality. Now, that brings me to the second part of your question. If I was a part of, the planning team at the United States of America, I'll be confused to move forward, because as much as we don't know what their commitment is, I think the United States look at countries like Malaysia and other countries, that is claiming South China Sea with some sense of confusion as well. What is our stand, right? What is our stand against China, for instance? And this is being asked by the United States of America, or people within that circle many times. How do we deal with this power? Do we continue to be friendly, but at the same time, assert sort of like our rights and stuff like that? So at the end of the day, I think this is the typical what we call the spaghetti bowl of international relations, right? There's no one clear direction or solution to the context that we're talking about. I think rather than thinking too much about the United States and the possibility of the change in terms of their commitment and stuff like that, we really ought to look back at ourselves and play this sort of like scenario and build sort of like our narrative and our interest in case that happens. I think that's a bigger question. How do we place ourselves in case this happens? What will then be the strategy? What if America suddenly retreats and say we're not interested any longer? I mean, that's a little bit extreme, but what if that happens? Where is Australia in all of right? And other partners, in the region, Indonesia, or maybe Philippines, other claimants, Vietnam, and whatnot. How do we build that bridge, and so on and so forth? So I think that's from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harisa. Professor Thaya, do you want to add on to that? Because earlier on, I think you mentioned about self-help and preemption. So I think that would tie in nicely to this question.
But given Rizal's opening statement that he wasn't an American, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a dual national. I'm American by birth, and I'm celebrating my 50th year in Australia, and I'm an Australian citizen. So I end up sometimes at defense colleges here, which I coordinated for 3 years, saying we, and the course members would go, who are you talking about? But having said that, the US national security interests are not going to change and change suddenly. That's US dependence on global trade that passes through the South China Sea. That's the US as a global military power needing sea lines of communication for military forces from Western Pacific through the South China Sea, Indian Ocean, Straits of Hormuz. So those interests are there. Then the residual interest of being credible to allies, the US and Japan in particular. So those interests aren't going to change. We know already in March this year had the interim national security strategic guidance by Biden, but the Congress mandates a US national security strategy within 150 days, and that's going to come down. And I have no doubts it's going to favor multilateralism and reinforce the Asia-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific as the centerpiece and most important area, because that's going to drive the global economy as we recover from COVID. And from that will come a defense strategy for the United States, and then an Indo-Pacific strategy and a maritime strategy. And so the credibility and the dependability of the US will be the proofs in the pudding, what the US is actually setting out. But those are the marching orders for the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command that he will follow. Also, that one could say about Malaysia, it's domestic situation, who will be prime minister next week. But leaving that one aside, who will control Congress after the midterms or in 4 years? But there is bipartisan support in the US, unbelievably, on one issue, and that's to oppose China. So no matter who is in the White House or who controls the Congress on trade and military issues, that's clear. And Biden's interim strategy is that the US will help shape the global rules and norms and not China alone. And then Biden's stress of multilateralism is good for ASEAN because it gives a cover. And finally, we finally get the US-ASEAN meeting in Cambodia that was disrupted and delayed because of the communication hitch on Anthony Blinken's flight out to the Middle East. Then yes, of course, if the Middle East flares up again, situation in Afghanistan goes pear-shaped and threats arose, the US can be distracted. But if it's a successful withdrawal from Afghanistan and the Middle East doesn't come back as a major issue, there'll be more American aircraft carriers in the region. And finally, I say you also work with America's allies, and they work with you. And when Trump, and I'll finish on this, was president, and I'm not a cartoonist, I really wanted to have a cartoon of Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in a game of tug of war. Two big monsters, pulling back and forth. And the time period is that Abe, he was prime minister, and Malcolm Turnbull of Australia would be standing there with their hands on the rope, sweating like crazy, while Trump was holding the rope and looking off in the distance going, "Make America great again, America first." The point is that allies in Japan and Australia quickly got together. We have to pick up the slack when America is self-doubting. Now, for dependability and credibility for the US, the black swan event is Taiwan. If that blows up, we're all going to be affected, and the US will be committed. That's the test. Taiwan Relations Act commits it to there. So you're right to raise these questions, and we do in Australia, and we're a long-term ally of the United States. During Confrontasi, Dean Russ told Australia the ANZUS treaty wouldn't apply. America wasn't going to come in. In the intervention on East Timor, however, the US government told Indonesia, you attack the Australian-led international intervention force, we'll have the USS Belleau Wood there with Marines on it, and we will invoke the charter. So you work with the US to the extent that you can. When you question it, you work with its allies, because if the allies get attacked, then the US credibility gets called in. So I don't think it's an either or, and I have to disagree that the US is going to suddenly get up and leave the region. It can't do that because it's deeply embedded financially, economically, trade, and through strategic reasons. And the strategy of Biden, as we're seeing it emerging, is to counter those strengths that China has, to undermine them by revitalizing the American military, but also, and this is where Malaysia comes in, without being mentioned, allies and partners who are willing to become interoperable with the US to defend their interests. So that's the interim guidance at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Thayer and Mr. Hariza. All right, our next question is from Admiral Dr. Nashan. Admiral, sir.
Thank you, Prof. Adam. My question may be to both of our panelists. First and foremost, I would like to explain that I'm a big fan of Annex 9 of UNCLOS, which is the Article 122 and 123. So most, I think, commonly, more often than not, the literal state or the claimant state project their rights rather than obligations. Article 122 and 123 is more on obligation. We cannot deny that we are living in a semi-enclosed area. China Sea is a semi-enclosed, and we are bordering among the neighboring state, that what is yours and what is mine is not really practicable. So Article 123 is really give a platform or modalities to the coastal state and claimant state to work for. I think, so do you see, I think Mr. Rizal or Prof. Thayer, do you see that these articles can work for the claimant state in South China Sea? To any attempt made for all the claimant state to work together within this Article 123 as a modalities or mechanism to move forward? Or maybe Malaysia can be the leading, because when we talk about the decisive action, Dr. Adina did mention that Malaysia and Vietnam already make one attempt in terms of this cooperation, in terms of submitting our extended continental shelf. I can see, in my humble opinion, it's also part of a cooperation under 123. So can you share your opinion about this article among the claimant state as a platform or a decisive action under this context? Thank you, bro.
Thank you very much, Admiral. Perhaps Professor Thayer, you can go first, then Mr. Hariza, you can add on to that. Thank you.
Right. Well, one, I can't see why not. I mean, everything that ASEAN always says international law, including or particularly the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. You rightly point out earlier, the U.S. is not a signatory, so we have problems of being referee and player at the same time, but other countries in particular. So the right to claim maritime zones from features and cooperation, recall the Malaysian December 2019 submission to the Commission on Limits of the Continental Shelf was without prejudice, inviting, if there were overlaps, inviting friendly negotiations. Now, the semi-enclosed sea, and the larger thing in UNCLOS, is the duty to cooperate to protect the marine environment. That's there. And that's where part of my strategy was to get the NGOs and civil society groups to raise those issues, because they'll do it with a vengeance, and culprits will be called out in particular. Where there are disputes, if you can't resolve them, you can go to the UN Charter, Article 33. There's a whole list. Can't do it that way. But UNCLOS says engage in activities of a practical nature to get on with it. So it's up to, one of my always, for an early strategy for the US, I recommend they ratify UNCLOS, but that's probably highly unlikely. So it's the Philippines didn't confer with ASEAN when it made its claim, so that created real difficulties. And then they set it aside, which set us all back. But if countries, and we take Malaysia, which is seen as a good, your contributions to peacekeeping, etc., your non-aligned aura, I'll call it that, not to get involved in ideology or a policy, makes you special. And the fact that you're an Islamic country also does that. So in other words, that taking an action under international law or making initiatives is a strong point, because international law plays a role, but not a decisive one, in maintaining global and regional order. And other mechanisms come in, balance of power, etc. I'm quoting from my former prof, Hedley Bull, Anarchical Society, but I don't want to get into that too deep. But there are a role, and whether Malaysia or not is a middle power, academics can fight that till the end of the sun comes down. But it is, if you take an initiative, you've got credibility. And my God, no, I don't think even China, nobody wants to push and have might make right in a conflict. And if you can convince China, but you can convince the other region, that negotiating and arbitration works. Now, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore have set a good track record. Vietnam hasn't chanced it yet by making a decision. But that's why in my strategy, I put out under the line that there are these disputes between countries. And if you're going to take on China, in other words, turn your back in one sense and do the practical work with your immediate neighbors. And then China will see, oh my goodness, wait a minute. They're laying an edifice here. They're agreeing to cooperate or agreeing to delimit. And if every time I mention fishermen, I had to be careful because I'm a Vietnam specialist and I have to put Vietnamese and Chinese fishermen in Malaysian waters in together. Okay, I hope I've really I tried to expand that out, but as every legal specialist tells us, UNCLOS is the constitution for the world's seas, the world's oceans. We need to reinforce that. And any state that wants to take it, that's why I'm saying you need a caucus, I think, with other. Indonesia would be ideal because they're exemplar and made major contributions when UNCLOS was coming up. And an initiative might, in certain areas, if it gained traction, divert us from conflict. And China moderates its behavior as a result of pushback over time. At the moment, there's been very little, so it's push, push, push. So I'll turn it over to the moderator, Dr. Adam.
All right, thank you, Professor Taylor. Mr. Hariza, do you want to add on to that?
Sure, just a little bit, because I think Professor Tay has extensively explained, but I just want to say that I really like this question because Article 123 is one of my favorites, right? It talks about cooperation. It's a very nice idea. It's a very nice notion. And I believe that if we make the initiative, just like what Professor Tay has mentioned, we will be known of it, for it, and we will get credit. And really, we are a small country and limited resources and whatnot. And this is probably a better tactic for us than to just basically go on to the other side of the sort of like the issue, which is the claiming, right, tactic. And it's always easier for you to claim than to cooperate, right? Yeah. But I have to warn that this is not easy. It is probably the most difficult thing to do, right? It should not stop us from trying, but we must be aware that it requires, new ideas, new thinking, and really innovative ways, to bring cooperation together. And I think if we are able to do that in some areas, not all, obviously, we can basically, like Professor Tay mentioned, right? China will be looking at, it's not just now Malaysia, it's now Malaysia and Vietnam, or Malaysia and Philippines, right? So then it becomes a little bit more complicated. That works, tactically better for us. So that's all I have to add to the remarks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hariza. We are running short of time, but we are going to extend for another 10 minutes for the question and answer. I will take two first from Admiral Badarudin and Admiral Shaiful. I think we can take these two questions together, and then we'll direct it to the speakers to answer. And then if we have time, then perhaps we can squeeze in one last question. So Admiral Saiful and Admiral Badarudin, Perhaps Admiral Saiful, you can ask first.
Thank you, Prof. My question is to Prof. Thea. China did conduct various types of marine scientific research in South China Sea. The latest article published by the Elsevier journal clearly indicated that they have carried out multiple types of survey, including modern seismic data collection within Malaysia waters since 2012. This analysis indicated that Mekong River is the predominant contributor of clay minerals in the southern South China Sea. My question is, from legal perspective, how do the illegal scientific activities, as mentioned, carry any weight to justify their ownership over South China Sea? Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Admiral. All right, how about Admiral Badarudin? What is your question?
Prof. Thank you, Prof. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. I'm First Admiral Badarudin from Royal Malaysian Navy. I pose this question to both of you, panelists. What I observe now, generally nothing has fundamentally changed in South China Sea. China seems to be continue to assert its claim, while the other party, the Americans, respond with more follow-ups and so on. While we at the Southeast Asian claimant, Malaysia not to be exempted, looking on with much concern and looking what to do next. I believe there are three approaches that Malaysia probably could take. I divided into three approaches. The first one is the far right. There is to take more conciliatory stance or getting closer to China with a closer bilateral relation. The second one is probably far left. There is advancing the nationalist. Believe there is enough argument with deeper cooperation with the US in order for stand up against China aggression. While the third option is to do what we are doing now, to continue with a very cautious approach and fully utilize the diplomatic channel. My question is, looking at the future, possible future development, there will be a point where Malaysia need to choose to either to go to first or second approach that I mentioned earlier. Probably you can enlighten us, what are the likely factors that need to be considered before that option is to be made? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Admirals. Perhaps Professor Thea, you can take the first question, and Mr. Hariza, the second question.
Oh, thank you. You gave him the hard one.
Thank you.
Right. One, the conducting scientific surveys in the exclusive economic zone cannot be used as a claim for sovereignty. Sovereignty is based on effective occupation administration over a long period of time, and China can't possibly do that with any feature that falls within Malaysian waters or its exclusive economic zones. But James Shoal, which its claim is the furthest land feature, isn't a land feature. It's, as I mentioned before, 20, 30 meters under the water, and it's as a result. You know, the fact that the Mekong River is discharging these minerals, what China's engaged in is called lawfare. It's saying, well, it's ours, and we're getting away with it. And if Malaysia and other countries that are directly concerned don't protest, they can be seen as acquiescing. And China tries to shut you up by bullying and coercion to say, look, well, you're quiet, they go tell Vietnam, Malaysia's quiet. Why can't you be like Malaysia? That's a good boy. So marine scientific, you know, the point is that we have a declaration of conduct of parties. There's 5 areas in there. Marine scientific work is one of them. Why is China always doing things unilaterally? Why can't, you know, for that cooperation in an earlier question under Article 123, you know, be expanded? we could all benefit, everybody. Save the fish stock to begin with, then work on the saving the coral reefs. But anyway, so since 2012, wow. In other words, I've been following this for much longer. I mean, I'm in my 70s, so I can, I've got a former admiral, a former head of border force here who said, oh, in the 1980s, you whet my appetite about the South China Sea. That was the 1988 battle with China that your CDF mentioned. I go back to 74 when I was finishing my PhD when China attacked in the Parasols. But so leaving that aside, China's using lawfare, and that's why part of my strategy recommended for Malaysia on international law and others is to challenge China's narrative and offer an alternative. And the legal position that Malaysia had would be an exemplar. You draw your baselines properly, everything else follows. And if you're pushing cooperation, as like was suggested, that's positive. That's what good international citizens do.
All right, thank you, Professor.
So I'll take a more difficult question, I think. But unfortunately, I don't think I have an answer to that question, but I can attempt to give you my thoughts, right? First of all, thank you for laying out 3 options, and I think that's quite interesting. 3 broad options that Malaysia might have. Quite frankly, I don't think we are just limited to 3 options. But just for the sake of looking at the answering or attempting to answer your question, I guess at the end of the day, it really depends on what the rate lines are for Malaysia, right? Would the rate line be? And I'm not suggesting, I'm asking, because I don't know, right? I'm not a policymaker in the country, but would it be if China really goes and stop one of the Petronas operations, for instance? Instead of just giving warnings, what if actually China actually invade and stop the operation? Is that our rate line? So, I guess we have to first understand and realize, and when we're just talking about China, we're not yet talking about the, Vietnam or the Philippines, right? What would that be? And if it crosses that rate line, then what would be our option, right? And I don't think all rate lines requires the same sort of like reaction. So it is rather complex and very difficult to give you an absolute answer of, do we get to that point where we have to choose or we have to do more than what we're doing? But I think really my attempt is that, we have to have a very clear narrative, at least in Malaysia, and what are these rate lines, how do we view this? I'm pretty sure the military has its angle. I'm pretty sure Wisma Putra has its angle. ISIS, as a think tank, we would have our angle. I don't think we have actually come to a point, to be quite frank, that we have actually sat down and consolidate all these internal angles and possibilities that we have. Right? We have useful conferences or webinars like this. I can't remember the last time that we pulled together strategic, organizations and agencies in Malaysia to sit down and to do sort of like, this exercise, and then, think about these rate lines and, what would we do in those instances. So that's my attempt to your question. I quite frankly, number one, do not think there is one answer that fits all the situation. Number two, I think, we've got to really, understand our position, but more importantly, our position as in the red line, but more importantly, I think what we need is really an internal process where we bring all the different parties together that might have different approaches and different definitions, and come up with some kind of an exercise that leads, possibly, hopefully, leads towards a more sort of like, well, I would say a more directed strategy for Malaysia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have almost run out of time. Perhaps I can squeeze in one last question, a very quick question by Datuk Mazuki, General Datuk Mazuki.
Thank you, Prof, for allowing me to ask a question. Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon. A short one. Taking into consideration on what has happened over the last 5 years to air missile on Woody Island on the Paracel, and on the same year also, Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague sided with the Philippines and declared 19-dash line having no legal basis. On 2020, saw a send-off between Malaysia, China, and Vietnamese vessel ended. But in 2021, as mentioned by Dr. Adina just now, China conducted an assertive action that saw 16 aircraft flying over Malaysia FAR. So my question is, has Malaysian diplomatic responses been effective in dealing with China's assertive action in the region? If not, how should Malaysia respond to China's assertive action in South China Sea from now onwards? Thank you.
All right, perhaps Mr. Hariza, you can say a few words regarding this question here.
Definitely a few words, not more than that. I think, to directly answer your question, definitely there is a sense that the diplomatic channel is working here. I think we will continue to use that as one of the channels. Please do not be mistaken that if a specific channel is working, it doesn't mean that certain assertiveness or certain action will not continue to happen over and over again, right? So you have to look at this in very separate ways, a very separate time frame. But the fact that we keep the channel open means there's some value to it, and I could actually see, quite frankly, that it is actually of a positive asset to Malaysia. So I wouldn't say, I wouldn't come short to say that no, this is useless. I mean, we keep on sending our messages, or we make we keep open our diplomatic sort of channel, but then China or other countries for that matter still assert their claims, and when is this going to end? I don't think that's it is a one-off thing like that. I think all channels needs to be open, and I do see value in having those activated. That's from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hariza. All right, I think we have come to the end of our question and answer session. We have not just run out of time, we have ran way over time slightly. I'm so sorry to the rest of the participants. I can see there are lots of question and answers in the chat box. Some has been answered by our speakers and also as mentioned by our organizer, DSA, later on, they may be able to respond to your answers. But during the Q&A sessions, I can see that some of the questions and answers are related to the questions that has been posted in the Q&A chat box. So I hope that you can take home some of the discussion that have taken place just now and that could answer your questions. I certainly believe that we have learned a lot today about the decisive action, what can be done, what has not been done, what has been done, and so far how effective it is, and the way forward. And I think decisive action doesn't just talk about military power in the sense that in Malaysia's context, we rely a lot on diplomacy, international law, international platforms, international organizations to mitigate and manage our security issues in the South China Sea. But of course, bear in mind, since the National Resilience College is organizing this webinar, we are talking about producing statesmen who are strategic thinkers. So the key thing that I can see that you can take home today is that rather than having answers, there are more to think about. There are more strategies that we can think about as spoken by our speakers this morning. And one of the things that I realized is that when I talk about strategy, we are talking about consequences. So what strategy are we planning to do? What kind of consequence do you want to attain? And bear in mind, Clausewitz has always reminded us the enemy has a say. So whatever you do, like Mr. Hariza and even Dr. Adina did mention that you will face consequence. Your opponent will react to what you do. So that reaction is, at this point, we are not sure, we cannot see the future, a lot of uncertainty, but we can sort of guess what kind of reaction our opponent will do. The second question is, our partners or our allies, how would they react? Would they come to our assistance? That is another bigger question. So again, like I say, more for us to think about, but in a sense that, reading this morning, I think there are so many new information, new insights, in-depth knowledge that has been shared by the speakers. And of course, we learned a lot during the discussion session just now. So I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers again for sharing their insights today and the participants for their engaging discussions. With that, thank you very much. I would like to hand back to General Amir.
Thank you, Professor Adam Leong and our esteemed panelists. Before we end today's event, with great pleasure, we now invite the Commandant of the National Resilience College, Major General Datuk Muhammad Nizam bin Haji Jaafar, to deliver his closing remarks.
Brigadier General Amir, thank you very much. President of Puspahanas, Datuk Lasdia, Datuk Pahlawan Syed Zahrul Putra bin Syed Abdullah. Sadly, we come to the end of this webinar for the last 3 hours or so. We have listened to the academic discourse that is very interesting indeed. View from panelists and questions by the course members and attendees certainly have made this webinar a success. Excellent view from the panelists and tough question from the participants, I may say. Every action, there's a counter reaction that we have to think about. We started today with full of insight and foundation for our discussion, addressed by the Chief of Defence Force, General Tan Sri Haji Effendi Buang in his keynote. We can't say enough in expressing our appreciation for his support. Thank you, Tan Sri. Today, we dwell on the potential flashpoint in the region. We discuss on the claimant standpoint, the legitimacy, the powerful nations that involve now in this particular region, our hope as well as our aspiration. South China Sea issue have surpassed traditional security interests. It is now a whole government response that's so much required in dealing with this issue. The subject that have been most talked about and discussed, and yet the solution is still far from what we expect it to be. We hope this webinar successfully give an impact towards our desire for amicable solutions. Hope we can now realize the grave differences between idealism and reality. Thank you again to our Chief of Defence Force, General Tan Sri Haji Effendi Buang, to the 3 esteemed and distinguished panelists, Mr. Harizal Hazri, Emeritus Professor Dr. Khalid Tayer, Dr. Adina Kamarudin, to our esteemed moderator, Associate Professor Dr. Adam Leong Kok Wee, National Defence University Malaysia, Defence Service Asia, the Platinum sponsors, DRB HICOM Defence Technologies Sdn Bhd, DefTech, Silver sponsor, Open Apps, BMW Group, Havilsan, and of course, Brigadier General Amir Mahmud bin Abdul Rahman, and my team. Thank you as well to the course members and attendees. Thank you all, and from National Resilience College, sign off.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Major General Datuk Muhammad Nizam, for your closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, with that marks the end of today's event. We wish to thank all distinguished guests, the invited panelists, college faculty and course members, participants and sponsors that have contributed greatly for the success of today's event. We hope all of you will continue to join us again in many of our webinars organized in the future. Till then, we meet again. Wabillahi tawfiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This webinar has officially ended, and as a reminder, we kindly request all webinar participants to complete the online survey before you leave this site. Your feedback is very much appreciated, and again, thank you very much and a very good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Datuk Komandan. Thank you very much, Mr. Harizal, Professor Chair. Thank you, sirs.
Off kan kita punya mic bawah.
DevTech, strong for excellence. Havelsan works for technologic excellence and security. For the security armies, countries, our world, our future. Havelsan designs defense, information technology, energy, education, military and civilian. We design innovative technologies for more secure, more efficient lives. We produce local, national, regional, global, tailor-made for every demand. We produce unique technologies for stronger, faster, superior systems. We design and produce for success in all areas in which we exist. Havelsan brings situational awareness with our exploration, surveillance and intelligence systems. Brings operational efficiency and assessment ability with our command and control systems. Brings striking power with our naval warfare systems. Reliable, effective protection with our cybersecurity systems. Trained manpower with our simulation systems. Peace and continuity with our homeland security systems. Corporate transformation and speed with our e-government applications. Effectiveness with our health IT applications. Sustainability with our logistics support. Value with our system engineering. Efficiency with our energy management systems. We, Havelsan, as a subsidiary of the Turkish Armed Forces Foundation, work for our clients in design, software, production, and integration capabilities. We work with our trust, our advanced technology, human resources, the importance we attach to industrial cooperation, smarter systems, and affordable solutions. Power, trust, superiority, efficiency, quality, originality, effectiveness, sustainability. We are getting prepared for tomorrow's technologies to meet the needs of our customers at the highest standards.